Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, very good morning to you. 6 o'clock, Tuesday, the 30th of January.
You're tuned into Breakfast with Eamonn Holmes and Isabel Webster.
Breaking news overnight as the Democratic Unionist Party agrees to a deal to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland and get Stormont back to work after 2 years.
Jeffrey Donaldson's message to Rishi Sunak in Brussels: we've jumped, now it's up to you.
The world on the brink. Despite new sanctions against Iran, Rishi Sunak and the United States continue calls for calm in the Middle East.
We are not looking for a war with Iran. We are not looking to escalate the tensions any more than they already have been escalating. In fact, everything we've done has been designed to try to de-escalate those tensions.
The royals return home. The King and Princess of Wales are on the road to recovery today as they both recuperate away from the limelight.
Also ahead, to breed or not to breed? That's the question we're putting today as we debate whether it's selfish to have more than 2 children.
And in sport this morning, it's all about drink, drugs and defections. Drink is Marcus Rashford. The drugs is Valieva, who's the Russian the skater. And also, we'll be talking about Tyrrell Hatton, who's moving over to live golf. There's a long way of doing it.
Hi, good morning. It's going to turn increasingly sunny for most of us as we go through today, but then some very strong winds are on the cards tomorrow. I'll have the details shortly.
So the top story on this Tuesday morning, the DUP has endorsed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland after almost 2 years of protest.
Yes, a marathon 5-hour meeting overnight led to the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, taking a leap of faith and securing the backing of his party.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
OK, so this is really significant. The deal now subject to the UK government implementing legislation.
Well, let's speak to the GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie. And Dougie, it's been a long night for you. I believe you were at that meeting in the small hours. What does this mean? It's been 2 hours of complete standstill. Great news for Northern Ireland, isn't it?
Well, it is 2 years this Saturday that the institutions behind us came down because of the DUP's opposition to the protocol. And if you remember then, roughly about a year after that, when Rishi Sunak came to power, we then had the framework document, and it was never seen by unionists as a framework, something they could work inside of, and they were looking for concessions in that to make sure that trade would flow safely and smoothly between the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And that comes down to a lot of issues because Northern Ireland, most people don't realise, has 3 borders in it. It has the customs border that was put in place by the Republic of Ireland in 1926. It has the land border, which is the constitutional border of Northern Ireland. That stays as it is. But most importantly, it has a NATO border in Northern Ireland. And of course, if we're looking down the barrel of 24 to 36 months that NATO does believe that there could be a war in Europe, well, the all-important port of Londonderry would come back into play. And of course, Lord Brooke in 1992 said that there was no longer strategic or economic interest inside Northern Ireland. That may well indeed change. And we have to think, has that had an influence on these talks? Because Donaldson does believe that he's got a deal that he can work inside. Still problems, although discussions are still going on around triangular trading. That's third countries to third countries. So Britain is now, of course, treated as a third country. And goods coming from a third country to a third country are not allowed inside the EU. So there could be some problems there with other EU members because there has been derogations put in place to allow that to happen. So you can imagine the likes of Italy and Spain saying, well, we would want that too. So that's the type of thin line that you're really looking at here. But it wouldn't be Northern Ireland without high drama in it. Last night, a private meeting at a country estate with a long drive to it, etc., was chosen for the DUP to have this executive meeting. That's all the members of the party executive and officers coming together to see will they fall in behind Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. And it then appears that some of his political opponents had a listening device or somebody in the room with a phone on them, but more than likely a listening device, and they were retweeting the meeting out as it went live, which we can only take the credibility of that one way because the only person that knows what went on in that private conversation that they were listening to was the person that either planted someone or something in the room. And that delayed the press conference for hours. In fact, it was 2 o'clock this morning that I was leaving, of all things, in Northern Ireland, a distillery, because that's where the press conference was, a distillery just up the road. So you can imagine the laughable part of it, that we had the media of Northern Ireland and indeed a lot of national media sat inside a brewery for round about 4 or 5 hours before that meeting came to an end. But in that, Sir Geoffrey had said that he is confident that what they now have, that they can work with, the Stormont brake in particular, that device that they weren't happy with, first of all, they said it wasn't beefy enough, it couldn't be pulled, is designed that if anything in European legislation comes into Northern Ireland that they're not happy with, they can pull this Stormont brake, go back to Westminster, and Westminster say, well, that's not suiting Northern Ireland. And a very simple way of explaining that to you is amalgam and teeth in the next couple of months is to be banned inside the EU. Well, that, because Northern Ireland is part of the National Health Service, that will cause problems here, and it will cause problems for those, particularly in poorer areas, that can't afford fillings that don't have amalgam in them. So the DUP at that point will obviously be saying to the rest of the political parties in here, pull the brake, go back to Westminster, and Westminster will then have to go to Brussels and say they can't have that in Northern Ireland. So that will be one of the first tests of the Stormont brake, to see how political parties work together.
Just finally and briefly, Dougie, we're not over the line yet, obviously. When should people living in Northern Ireland be able to have their government back and, you know, things run as they should be?
Well, from what I believe, we will see now is this legislation that Rishi has promised the DUP will then be put through Westminster, made into law, and at that point they will say, OK, you have now jumped as well. And I think that will take to Thursday, and I think we may see us sitting to elect a Speaker and ministers behind us on Saturday.
Excellent.
As
Excellent
early as
news.
Saturday. Could be Monday, but I would believe it's Saturday.
So, Dougie, this is a developing story throughout the morning. We will be returning to you throughout the programme, obviously, for updates, and we'll be getting reaction and analysis as we run through till 9:30 this morning. For the moment, my friend, thank you very much indeed. Good news there.
To international tensions now, and the Prime Minister has urged Iran to de-escalate tensions after 3 US soldiers were killed on a US base in Jordan over the weekend.
Iran has denied responsibility. The Pentagon says it's not looking for a war with Iran, but it will do what is needed to protect US troops.
Well, earlier, both the US and the UK imposed further sanctions on Iran, including senior Iranian officials and gangs that targeted critics of the Middle Eastern country.
Joining us now in the studio, former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Riley, with his take on all of this. This is brewing, this is escalating. We still await what the US's reaction will be. What do you think it will be, Charlie?
Well, I think that word key, escalation, is absolutely right, because nobody wants to see it escalated to a point where we're seeing effectively World War III, which has been touted in that region. We know how destable the region is with what's going on with Israel and Gaza. Obviously, the way in which Iran have been involved in funding and training Houthi rebels, Hezbollah, similarly in Tehran. So it is an incredibly difficult picture. But I think you're absolutely right. You know, de-escalating the tensions there, going after Iran in a particular way that doesn't involve necessary military action, I think is obviously the starting point. That's what the UK and the US have done, and we'll just have to see where it goes from here on.
Other things that will be on the top of the Prime Minister's agenda today, the language being chosen by the Mail, and there's also a war reference, but obviously a play on words there. They're saying the Prime Minister's going to war over the rail strikes. Now, lots of commuters this morning having to work from home. We're in the middle of 9 days of disruption to commuters. But is it fair to say there's some criticism, actually, of this legislation that he's brought forward and is being not used by rail bosses? And apparently ministers were warned that this legislation would fail. It's too complicated.
Well, ultimately, it's a choice that you can make. You know, there's a minimum service levels that's been put in to make sure that when there is strike action, and everybody has the right to strike, and, you know, we don't want to see that. We don't particularly want to see it in January, when after a Christmas and New Year, people, you know, find it difficult enough going back to work. I think in January it's a bit of a bluesy month. You know, the idea that people are faced with these strikes and unable to get to work because of the disruption, I think, is something that you'll have to pose a question to the rail bosses why they choose to do it in January. But there's a question over the minimum service levels that has been brought in for the government. It's a choice now that the rail companies are not fulfilling that obligation.
Yeah, I mean, the rail industry have apparently said that the legislation's too complicated and will worsen industrial relations further. And I do think it's interesting that LNER, which is actually entirely state-owned, also have chosen not to use this legislation to provide, I think it's 40% of a normal service. And there have to be questions then about why they're choosing not to use this legislation. Was it just once again being used as rhetoric by politicians to reassure people, but it hasn't changed anything?
Well, you'd hope not. I mean, because, you know, the legislation's in place to protect people, in order to get to work, to protect people, whether it's in the NHS. I mean, that was the catalyst, I think, for the minimum service levels, because we were seeing so many strikes in the NHS. We wanted to make sure that people who needed to see a doctor, needed to go to any, that they would have a guarantee minimum service level to make sure that they get the care that they need.
Charlie, I'm just amazed that it's gone on for so long. No sense of a settlement, and it looks as if it could go on forever and ever.
Well, I think I don't want to be too cynical about it, but in a year where we know a general election is coming, obviously there'll be heightened political motivations, I think, from people, whether it's unions or whether it's from politicians. I mean, I'll be fair on both sides, but I think, you know, ramping up rhetoric or making a point, if it's Britain isn't working, then of course you want to call strikes left, right and centre, I would have thought. But the ultimate aim is to make sure that people can get to work safely, on time, to keep the economy ticking over and to not face the disruption disruption that people are currently facing.
Just lastly, I have to ask you, because I know you used to be a special advisor for Michael Gove. Michael Gove's in the papers this morning for being in this WhatsApp group with Kemi Badenoch called Evil Plotters that's emerged. This is in the front of The Guardian this morning. And this is 2 days after Kemi Badenoch came out on the morning round saying that she wasn't friends with any rebels within the party. Is this just, irony and an amusing group title, or is there perhaps more to this story?
Well,
Are you in the group?
I don't.
Are you one of the evil plotters?
I don't know of that group, no. And colleagues or former colleagues of mine will attest to the fact that I point-blank refused to reply to people on WhatsApp because I didn't think that was the most appropriate way of communicating. So I'll have to make further inquiries and come back and let you know in the next hour.
Thank you. Oh, good. OK, perfect. We'll look forward to that. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. 12 minutes to come up to 30 minutes. Past 6 on this Tuesday morning. Let's have a look at some other stories making the news today.
And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's accused rail bosses of refusing to use new legislation to limit the impact of the latest round of strikes. It comes as the rail drivers' union ASLEF begins another series of rolling strikes and overtime bans until February the 6th. However, ministers were warned the legislation was always doomed to fail. We'll be speaking to ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan just after 9 o'clock this morning.
A move to block the government's Rwanda bill in the House of Lords has been voted down last night. It was a majority of 122. Peers voted 206 to 84 against the motion designed to block it. During discussions, the Archbishop of Canterbury accused the government of outsourcing the country's legal and moral responsibilities, saying Britain can do better.
And weather records were broken in Scotland on Monday as temperatures reaching an almost summer-like 20 degrees. Achferry in Sutherland recorded a temperature of 19.9 degrees, beating the previous high of 19.6, which was recorded on Sunday in the North West Highlands.
King Charles and the Princess of Wales both returned home on Monday after their time in hospital, recuperating after surgery.
Yeah, and the King was seen smiling as he left the premises with the Queen after 3 nights of medical care after his operation.
Kensington Palace has said that the Princess is making good progress. She returned to Windsor. And joining us now to discuss this further, Royal Correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, morning to you.
Good morning, Eamonn. Good morning, Isabel. Yeah, His Majesty looked really rather fine, didn't he? Almost as if he'd been on holiday, waving at the crowds, talking to them. And I rather fancy that Trumper, the court hairdresser, had been in there because he looked rather well. Look at his haircut there. Really rather nice and trim. And quite clearly, very glad that it's all over. But I must say, he has been in hospital in London before. 1962, when he was 12 years old, he was rushed to Great Ormond Street Hospital with a very hot appendix. It was an emergency appendectomy. And literally, the surgeons saved his life. It was played down at the time, but it was really quite serious. And of course, in those days, peritonitis, blood poisoning, could have been fatal. But there you are. There we see him having a chat. I think he immediately puts the window down. He can't stand being in a confined space, whether it's a room or a car. And I think the car was heading off towards Windsor, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if they don't go up to Burke Hall on the Balmoral estate, because that's where when they both had COVID during the pandemic, that's where they stayed. He's going to have a month of recuperation. Very, very different from the departure of the Princess of Wales, Kate, of course. She went by the back door. There was no photo call, and perhaps that tells us a great deal. They don't keep you in hospital for 13 nights for nothing. It's obviously not a minor matter. It's a serious matter. We haven't got further details about what exactly was the reason for the surgery, but she's entitled to her privacy like any other woman. She's a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, and whatever she wants to tell us about her condition in due course, I'm sure we will know, and it would be indelicate to inquire or snoop too much in the meantime.
Absolutely, and of course we send our best wishes to both of them. We know that Kate and the King are close. They're fond of one another. And there is a school of thought that perhaps the King made more of his exit yesterday to try and not necessarily distract, but, you know, to allow her the breathing space she needs, because obviously, as you say, her condition has been a bit more private and a bit more serious. Do you think that there was something in that, perhaps?
I think you're very perceptive, Isabel. I think that's exactly what he did, because obviously the media had been camped out there for 2 weeks. They wanted some pictures. They were entitled to them, and they got them, and they got some very good pictures. Kate, of course, as you say, we wish her a speedy and complete recovery, and I'm sure she was delighted to be home with her children. There we see her in happier days with them, preparing, I think, Christmas presents there. She will stay at Adelaide Cottage because they're going to school locally, but it's not ideal. It's not a very big property. In fact, the nanny can't even be accommodated within the house. She's got a premises in one of the outhouses there, which has been converted. And one of the former tenants, Mrs. Rosemary Townsend, who was the wife of Group Captain Peter Townsend, who had a famous affair with Princess Margaret, she said it was the coldest place she'd ever known in the whole of her life. So not ideal, and I'm quite sure that in due course they'll go off to their house, Anma Hall, on the estate at Sandringham, where they'll have more space. Of course, her parents live not far away in Berkshire, and I'm sure there'll be a comfort to her, and maybe she'll spend some time there. But it's going to be until the other side of Easter before she's doing what we see her doing there, visiting what looked to me to be like a hospital. Because you know what Queen Mary said? We're the royal family. We're never tired, and we love hospitals.
We love you, Michael. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We'll leave it there. Michael Cole. Let's find out what the weather is going to be doing today and how it will affect you, Alex Burkle, with that.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkle here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
Now it's time for our brand new Great British giveaway and your chance to win a whopping £18,000 in cash.
Whopping.
A whopping.
I hate that word,
Oh,
but I
okay.
would like £18,000. That would be good. £18,000, break it up. It's like having £1,500 to play with every month for an entire year.
Yes, imagine what you could do with that. Think of the holidays. Here's all the details you need to make a chance to make that cash yours.
This is your chance to win £18,000 cash in our very latest Great British giveaway. Cash to spend on anything you like. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. What would you use that for? It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Still to come, a plea for more health funding around the country amid an increase in the number of STI diseases.
This is Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn and Isabel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, local authorities are concerned about the rise in STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, after reports of increased cases of chlamydia and syphilis.
But many feel awkward about going to the doctor with such things, and there seems to be no end to this in sight. Sophie Reaper with this report.
So you've come in for an STI test today.
A sexual health breaking point. The words of the local government association as new findings reveal that cases of certain STIs have soared in the last 5 years.
97% of council areas are reported an increase in gonorrhea, 71% in syphilis and some 37% in chlamydia. And of course we need to test, because if people believe that they've got any risk of picking up one of these diseases, which can be really detrimental to you, then they should go to a clinic and they should get tested and diagnosed as soon as possible so they can receive early treatment.
Since 2013, the number of sexual health consultations has increased by 1/3 as people are urged to take STIs more seriously.
If you did have an STI, first thing to say is it's quite common that you wouldn't have any symptoms. So with chlamydia and gonorrhea, up to 50% of women don't have symptoms at all with those STIs. So if you had that STI but you didn't know about it, it could cause issues, because A, you could transmit it to other partners, and they wouldn't be aware that they're actually transmitting it. And B, even if you have no symptoms from an STI, it can cause issues.
But as demand for consultations has grown, so has the number of STI cases. One of the areas worst affected by this growing problem is here in Wigan. They've seen their number of gonorrhea diagnoses skyrocket by over 350% in the last 5 years. But this isn't an isolated incident. It's a growing issue all over the UK, with the government now being urged to take action to better support local sexual health services.
I don't like to use the word crisis, but we are very close to a crisis. Access isn't good enough, there's no doubt about that, and there's no doubt that that is as a result of reduced funding. So we've had a real terms funding reduction of about £150 million over the last 10 years going to all sexual health services.
But what do local authorities feel they need from the government in order to improve access?
First of all, a 10-year sexual health strategy. I think we need to know how we're going to deal with this on a 10-year basis so we can start reducing those numbers. Second of all, really, is to get some funding, sustainable funding, so we know what the funding looks like over the next 10 years, so we can really fund commission services to deal with it. And thirdly, really just to make sure that the costs which are being borne by the local authorities, many of whom are in trouble at the moment, as you all know, really is becoming very tight to fund these services.
With local authorities close to crisis levels and the number of STI cases continuing to grow, many will feel this is an issue that will require more than just a sticking plaster. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Right, let's get the latest sports update. Paul Coyte with us now. Marcus Rashford, front page of the Sun today.
I know.
Says Rashford 12-hour tequila party before calling in sick.
I had a tequila party. It probably lasted about 10 minutes, though. That's the thing. I mean, it's not bad, is it? 12 hours worth. So Marcus Rashford, we all know, is great Manchester United striker, but you kind of worry.
Not that great. That's the whole problem.
He has been, and then he hasn't been, and then he's accepted now responsibility for his actions, which, let's face it, he hasn't really had a choice because everybody's talking about it. There's the waitress that was there that was serving him. She's told the story, and it just seems like. Well, you tell me. What do you think?
I tell you, if this was George Best, no one would lift an eyelid, or Brian Robson, or Paul McGrath, or
it would be called Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, wouldn't it? That would be it.
Right. Okay. So he's broke club protocol. He deserves. I mean, he's been fined 2 weeks' wages, which for his case is about
£650,000.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. If you go, this man has been fined over £500,000, you think, wow. But then when you realise it's a couple of weeks' wages, and even that is like, OK, fine. You know, that's it. But something needs.
That's the problem. Is that not the problem? That the vast amounts of money these people earn, the adulation they get on the pitch, they don't get the normal highs that we all do, I think.
I think you're right.
And so they're corrupted, aren't they? They're just literally spoilt.
And also
they behave like this.
No, you're right, because then also where do they look up to, and who is the person that's disciplining them, and will they actually be bothered with what they say? There's situations where we've had players before that will just go, well, I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care. Just keep the money in. I earn more than you, and I'll go somewhere else. I'm not saying that that's what Marcus Rashford is, but. And also the thing when we talk about old players back in the day, and you'd hear stories, and I've heard hundreds of them where we'd be out until the early hours, then we'd play later, and you know the old boys back in the day, and the journalists would never say anything about it, and it was always expected that they could do whatever they want. Football is a different game now, and so not only. They can even be tested what they dreamt the night before, you know, when they go in the morning. Back in those days, there weren't those tests. And also, it wasn't at the level it is now, where every tiny thing will make a huge difference.
So they're expected to live like monks, but paid like gods. And it's just an impossible situation. Lots of people just fall off that tightrope.
Is it impossible? And is it worth doing? And for the adulation, for the money and everything, and maybe have the fun afterwards. But then again, we are talking about young blokes as well. So one night out, there you go. But anyway, 650 grand. He wore a blank expression as he arrived at training yesterday. A blank expression.
No different from any normal player.
Let's talk about this Russian figure skater, Kamila Valieva.
Yes.
Found guilty, I don't know what took them so long, of using performance-enhancing drugs.
Trimetazidine, which is used. Well, I mean, we talked about this a couple of years ago. This was at the 2022 Olympics. So she is the greatest skater in the world. Cut a very long story short, she's 15 years old, and she's the only female skater to do the quadruple spin, and everybody was expecting her to clean up at the Olympics. So anyway, during the Olympics, the Russians, firstly, they have the team event, and they win it very easily. Then it's announced straight after that she'd failed a drugs test a year before. So it was decided, now, what do we do? Do we let her go into the individual or do we ban her? And then the decision was made, she's 15 years old, how can we not? So they let her go into it, and she really made a mess of it because obviously it was playing with her head.
She did make a mess.
And it really didn't work out. So anyway, then we've had the Court of Arbitration for Sport involved, and they announced yesterday that, yes, she's going to get a 4-year ban.
It's taken them 2 years to do that.
Oh, it's taken a huge amount of time because the Russians said she'd passed, she'd failed it. Oh, but then again, we believe the reason because it was one of those that I always love to hear the drug excuses. It was a contaminated fork. She was eating something that her grandfather, because it's used for heart disease. So unless she'd actually gone like that with a great load of the drugs and then shoveled it in, there's no way.
What I'm trying to understand is how would drugs help you as a figure skater? Because a lot of that's obviously dependent on your skill as opposed to, you know, I suppose your stamina does come into it.
It is. I think it is stamina. It's heart. So it's used, it's performance enhancing. It's not actually known as a steroid, but that's what they do. They look for all these different drugs and different things and go, actually, that's going to help because that will lower the heart rate and therefore you'll be able to perform longer and keep training. And let's not forget, she's a kid. She's a 15-year-old. So the blame is not... but the blame's not with her. It's with everybody around her.
Why is it not with her?
Because she's a kid.
You would have known at 15.
Yeah, but also you've got to remember that she's a kid and probably from the age of 3, train. This is what you do. This is what we...
Under a communist regime.
Yeah, well, communist, but under a Russian regime.
That's what I mean, yeah.
It's just they will do as they're told. And the life, I imagine that she's had no life. And, for example, when she had the disaster of the individual, her coach was screaming at her, you know, you didn't deliver, you should have done this, you should have done that. And I do feel sorry for them, and I just feel sorry for the kid. It's the whole regime around them, it's not actually the athlete itself.
Yes, but she could have made it all OK, as Eamonn says, if she'd come out and said, look, I was a kid, this is wrong.
She still is a kid.
Yes, but I just think there needs to be a bit of contrition, and it doesn't seem like there is any.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Very interesting.
Yeah, you know, it's just a mess all round. But the good part of it is that the Americans had a whole campaign where they've had empty boxes. I think we've got the picture in there. They're all standing there with these empty medal boxes. Look at this. And this has been going on for a couple of years, saying that there was cheating and they came second. And this came out 2 hours ago, that eventually, after 2 years, now they will be given their gold medals because the Russians will be thrown out.
But I wonder what joy they'll get out of that.
Well, if it arrives in the post, it's not quite the same, is it? They're standing there where they should be.
Sort of past, as it were.
Absolutely.
Performance enhancing, we should be thinking about that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be nice. I've got coffee to rely on. You don't even have that.
Don't even have that.
By the way, I have been tested, and the results come out in 2 years, so we'll see how things go. But I'm positive that things won't be positive.
You'll be positive.
Yeah.
You should want your money back. Front pages coming next, OK? We'll find out what's making the news this morning. Alex Armstrong, Nikki Hodgson, after this.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Front pages of the papers on this Tuesday morning stack up like this. The Times, first of all, with counter-terrorism police warning Iranian dissidents living in Britain that they face an increased risk of violence and kidnapping.
The Guardian's warning households across England that they face a £2 billion council tax increase despite Rishi Sunak's promise of pre-election giveaways.
A headline in the Mail, Rishi goes to war over rail strikes. Rail bosses refusing to use new legislation to limit the impact of strikes.
The Eye is warning of the threat of war as the Foreign Secretary David Cameron's expected to say the UK is facing the biggest threat since the Cold War.
And finally, Mirror leads with the King and the Princess of Wales. She's there as well with the Queen, thanking well-wishers for their support after they separately left the same hospital in London. They are now recovering at home.
Well, we're going through the papers this morning with the author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson and the political commentator Alex Armstrong. It's interesting, the choice of the word war by the Daily Mail in relation to rail strikes. It's a bit unfortunate, given that everybody's sort of wondering if we're on the brink of something a bit more serious. But what's your take on this? I mean, it's a lot of the papers this morning, world at war, Alex. Prime Minister's expressed his concern and calling for calm.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? We've been talking about this for a few weeks as well, so I think this has been gearing up with, obviously, Israel-Palestine conflict, the Red Sea, Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of war talk at the moment, and we've had NATO and Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, out as well, banging the war drum, possibly to get a little bit more money. But, you know, it does feel like things are heating up, doesn't it? It does feel like we're at this precipice of something potentially a lot broader, a bigger scale, potentially war with the US, attacks on US troops yesterday. The US obviously have claims that Iran-backed rebels in Syria and Jordan have struck and killed 3 of their troops and injured 35, which is quite a considerable amount of people. So it's obviously quite a serious attack. And so now Joe Biden is saying we're going to hold all of those people accountable, which to me sounds like more targeted military action against potentially Iran.
Well, I don't know why that frightens everyone. I mean, what has Iran got that we should be worried about? They haven't got a nuclear capability.
They have been trying to enrich their uranium.
A source yesterday claimed they're about 4 to 5 months away from having at least a serious...
Well, now's the time to attack them then, I would have thought, before they do so.
And, of course, the other problem is what Iran are propping up. You know, the money they're pumping into other countries, obviously. You know, that's been the discussion that's been going on for months now. Iran funds other countries' dissidents. I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, Biden's had that turn immediately from saying just a few days ago, oh, you know, we're not going to retaliate, let's keep things peaceful, to now, oh, it's on. I mean, that's quite disturbing, the turn of that.
Is that pushed by Donald Trump, do you think, saying all these huge claims, you know, this wouldn't have happened, Ukraine wouldn't have happened, Gaza wouldn't have happened, all of this if I was in power. Well, and there's this pressure on Biden, and I think there were calls yesterday for what was described as devastating retaliation.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's in this very tricky position, isn't he? I mean, he's got to look like the strong man, even if he isn't, even if that's not his... that's not how he operates, because otherwise he's going to lose the election. That's quite obviously what it's about. But that's a very difficult thing to play with, you know, if you're trying to look a certain way to the American people and to the world, but actually you're trying to not upset geopolitics. I mean, that's a very difficult tightrope to walk. I mean, what I'm interested in is this kind of call in general saying this is the most, you know, tense things have been for a very, very long time. And do you remember, Eamonn, when me and you were talking about that alarm text that the government sent out in April? Do you remember? Yeah. And we really thought it was to do with war coming, and everybody else was like, no, me and Eamonn were like, oh, yeah, it's definitely to do with that.
A nuclear warning.
Yeah.
I didn't get that text
and I didn't get that text either. I mean, I'd personally rather not know, but, you know, just rather get on with things. But, I mean... war is actually on the horizon, well, what are the government going to do about it in terms of comms with us? I mean, are we going to start getting practice with gas masks, or what happens?
Well, how's it going to affect us? It's not going to affect us. I mean, Iran do not have a nuclear capability, so, and even if they are 6 months away from developing one, they have to get their ballistic missiles. They've got to get everything in order, and they wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, and look, I do think this a lot of this has been drummed up recently in the last week. We talked about conscription only just a week ago, right? And I do feel like this is the sort of time of year when you tend to get, as I said at the start of the show, a lot of defence secretaries and organisations like NATO who want a bit more cash. And maybe they do need more cash to up our defences. Maybe we do need to renew some things. But I don't think the general public will feel it. I think they just want to start building support for a potential outbreak of war, this is how it begins.
Well, Lord Cameron is saying on the front of the Eye that this is the most dangerous time for the UK since the Cold War.
Yeah, so this is going to be potentially his biggest first speech as he's come back into government. So Cameron's obviously preparing, again, this is all part of the same story here, saying that, liberal democracy, we thought it was a given. Now we defeated communism during the Soviet period in the Cold War. But obviously now it's looking like that's not the case. Liberal democracy hasn't prevailed globally, and that we're now under threat. So he's saying, they're not looking for war with Iran. They don't want a war, despite what potentially Joe Biden's banging over in America. But again, there's a lot of issues across where Britain are interested in, which is like Gaza, talking about aid there. So Cameron's really coming out with potentially the biggest speech of the government this year so far. It's going to be very interesting.
And yet, he can't even appear in the Commons to answer questions. And I don't know if people find that worrying. I mean, I totally...
But it's not his fault.
It's not his fault, and there is precedent. However, if we are facing war, surely that needs to be resolved. And I know they've been looking at some ways of getting him to stand behind a line or something at the back of the Commons. But,
it is an optics thing. And if you are in such a powerful position, people do need to be able to see you and think that you're reliable as a minister. I mean, I think what is interesting about this is he's talking about, we've got to kind of balance things with hostile actors. I guess thinking about the war question, Eamonn, what I'm thinking about is if somebody rogue comes out and does something bonkers, sends a bomb or triggers something in another country, that's what will set it off. I'm not saying that Iran's going to do it. Do you know what I mean? Thinking back to what happened, how did the First World War start? It's everything feels like it's kind of a trigger point at the minute.
Right, we're ready for it. We're on the edge of it. They're building on expectations for it. That's the way.
Good morning, everybody.
Meanwhile, funny, I saw a good headline here in the paper, and a guy called John Cooper Clarke saying, "Destroy capitalism. I care much more deeply about potholes." And I think that would be my philosophy for news and what people think of, because these things, people don't even know where a lot of these countries are. People couldn't pick Iran out on a map.
That's
people
true.
could not tell you where Rwanda is on a map. And they've got more practical things. Which brings me to council tax and the lies given by the government again. Households across England, and this will apply to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well, will face an inflation-busting council tax raid in spring. With this. So, Nikki, tell us what you make of this. This is front page of The Guardian.
Yeah, and it's actually only the front page of The Guardian. It probably should be a bigger story. I mean, only, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we had Jeremy Hunt coming out saying, I'm definitely going to cut taxes for you. Maybe it'll be income tax, maybe it'll be national insurance. But at the same time, in order to plump up the coffers and to protect public services, we are going to push up council tax, and we're going to push it to its highest possible amount, which is a 4.99% increase. If you go 5% or over, you have to have a referendum to have it voted in. So this is going to work out about £100 more if you're in a typical Band D property. That is a lot of money extra on top of everything that people are paying out at the minute. People's finances are absolutely stretched, and then here comes the government saying, "Oh, we're going to give you something," but actually no, they're going to put that council tax up. Why do people
they'll
vote
immediately
these
say,
people?
"Well, we're not putting the council tax."
Well, of course they will. They can blame it on, on local authorities. I get what they're doing.
They don't fund councils the way they should be, and the responsibilities for council, like social care, is phenomenal.
Absolutely, and this is still the government saying we are going to put your taxes up to get money from somewhere for something. You have to pay attention to this story. Forget what Jeremy Hunt said the other week. This will affect you more.
Total disgrace, isn't it? I mean, the people of this country's bank accounts have been raided skyrocketed for the last 2 years, and people can barely afford to pay their heating bills. Still, to this day, can't afford proper meals in some parts of the country, and we're now asking the taxpayer to cough up even more money, despite the sort of pittance that have been given back through national insurance. There's just not enough support for people, is there? And I think the people are really suffering, and it seems to be this massive detachment. As you said, Eamonn, we're talking about war on one page, and the one thing that people really want to hear about is where their money's going, and that's the only headline talking about it today.
And that extends, quite frankly, to the next story, Nikki, front of the Mail, and this is the story about train strikes.
Yes.
Apparently, since COVID, the taxpayers are paying an extra £54 million a week to keep train services running in this country. Bosses facing these £1 million bonuses, despite endless industrial action, and all they had to do was to keep the trains running. Yeah. And they're clearly failing at that.
Well, of course,
this is the biggest mess. This is like the water utility companies, the privatisation of trains. Trains is the biggest shambles that you could imagine, as I say, outside the water utilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is Rishi Sunak, obviously, on the back of the HS2 announcements, let's put it into context, of saying that plan is back on because the mayors, Burnham and Streatham, Andes, they've got the plan back on track and they're pushing that through. You know, because
to be funded privately.
To be funded privately, they figured out, but they've worked, cross party. They've come up with an alliance and a plan, and that's much better than what Rishi Sunak's doing. So obviously he's got to get a story in saying, "Oh, I am actually doing something for commuters, and what I'm doing is pushing back on the bosses." He's refusing new legislation. They're refusing, new legislation to impact strikes, and he says no, it's got to be pushed through anyway. Because at the minute, most commuters have less than 40% of trains running on a daily basis. What is the point? I mean, how is anyone getting to work right now? We're very lucky, because in London there are multiple routes which you can take, but I don't know how people are managing.
I think I always worry, Alex, someone who's decided we're going to live in a certain place, but making that purchase of that home on the basis that it's on a train line, and then something like this happens.
It's crazy, isn't it? And it's, as we're at war with people who drive cars as well, let's face it, at the moment, particularly if you're trying to get into London, this is not welcome news. And, I'm actually thinking of trying to get out of London in the next few months. And I'm now thinking, is that actually a good idea? Well, I'd be able to make it into the office in the morning. Yeah. I want to get out to have a little bit of space and get away from the city, but I don't know whether it's actually a reasonable thing to consider. And frankly, if we're trying to create more economic fairness across the country, transport links like railways are the most critical infrastructure we can look after and build.
Yeah. But I often look at things, Alex, and I think, why has that headquarters got to be in London? Why has that office got to be in London? Why can't it be in Grantham, or why can't
at least home's an option as well for people on these strike days, which is different from how it used to be. But there's a piece in the Telegraph, I think, an anonymous piece written by a nurse, saying that when she saw what train drivers were asking for, it made her blood boil. She said, "I earn £23,000. The fact train drivers earn so much in the first place is not only astonishing, it's insulting to key workers like myself."
Yeah, there's certainly a disparity. I mean, this is what the argument would be is a privatised sector, right? So therefore they can adjust pay based on the rail fares, which they obviously increase every year. If we increase taxes to support the NHS, I mean, we know the NHS does get a good amount of money. It's 20% of all tax revenues. But, if we did the same, I'm sure nurses would have a much better deal under some sort of private situation. Yeah. The reality is, though, that the railway system has failed. The privatised part of the franchisee part has failed because it doesn't give competition and it doesn't give any benefit to the customer, particularly when the trains haven't improved in bloody 20 years, in my opinion.
Yeah. OK, guys, we'll have you back on track in about 40 minutes' time. Thank you both very much indeed. We've got a government minister standing by, and we'll be back with them right after this.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the government's announced an overhaul of the social housing system to make it fairer, as they claim. Under the new measures, people who commit antisocial behaviour could face a ban of up to 5 years.
Joining us now, the Housing Minister, Lee Riley, with this one. So, good morning to you, Minister. What have you come up with this for about antisocial behaviour? Why is this such a concern to you?
So social housing is a finite resource. We want to make sure that it's working correctly, and we want to make sure that the people who get access to social housing are those who deserve it and those who have played by the rules. So in a whole range of things, be it antisocial behaviour or connection to a local area or connection to our country, we're consulting today for 8 weeks on changing those rules to make social housing fairer for the long term for everybody.
But this is like excluding kids from school sort of thing. What do you eventually do? So you get these antisocial people, they're in social housing. What do? You throw them out? Where do they go to?
Well, the first thing to do is to try and get rid of antisocial behaviour at source. So you have to work with the people who are doing things which doesn't work for their neighbours or for the community they live in, and try and explain that to them, try and work through it with them, try and make them stop. But we have to be clear, there has to be a deterrent at some point, and we're saying here we're consulting on a 3 strikes and you're out effective rule, which says, you get a chance, you make a mistake, you get a chance to rectify it, you make a second mistake, you get a chance to rectify it, you do it 3 times, that's not acceptable. I know as a constituency MP, I see it as a constituency MP in North East Derbyshire, how much it affects other people and communities. And I think it's important the government bring forward proposals which say this is not acceptable and you shouldn't do it.
Except where do they go? And why spend so much energy on working out ways to evict people rather than on actually building more social housing?
We've built an awful lot of social housing over the last 14 years. We've built the best part of 700,000 houses, but at the same time as building lots of houses, which we have done, and we'll be building more in the coming years ahead, you have to make sure that access to that housing goes to the people who need it the most and in a way which is fair and people have confidence in. If people are committing antisocial behaviour, if they don't have connections to the area, if they're not saying the right thing, if they have certain criminal convictions, that's all the kind of thing I think it's important we take into account, both when people apply for social housing and then if they're doing the wrong thing when they're in social housing.
But just to pick up on that, I mean, what are you saying? If somebody has a criminal conviction, what's going to happen to them if they are behaving in an antisocial way and they're evicted from social housing? Presumably that's the worst possible course of action. It's going to lead to further criminal behaviour.
Well, then they'd have to look for housing elsewhere, and they would obviously talk to the council about temporary accommodation, but then ultimately they would probably have to find accommodation elsewhere in the private rent sector or elsewhere. The first thing we want to do, as I said a moment ago, is make sure that we work with people who are not who are not living in a harmonious way with our local neighbours in order to try and stop that. That's why people will be given multiple chances. It's why we ensure that when mistakes happen that people have the opportunity to rectify those. But you do have to say at some point, I'm afraid this isn't acceptable. It's not fair on your neighbours. It's not fair on your community. And that's exactly why we're consulting today. We want to get this right. We recognise that there are lots of different examples and scenarios underneath it. But the principle, which is you've got to play by the rules, is a very important one, and one which the government is very clear needs to be taken forward.
Can I ask you about the rail strikes at front of the Daily Mail today? Prime Minister there is said to be going to war over all of this, and yet there are warnings in some of the papers that this was only a matter of time, that this new minimum service legislation was far too complicated and risked making all of the industrial disputes far worse. So is it actually a case that Rishi Sunak hasn't delivered what he promised with this new law?
Well, the choice about striking is with the unions. I'm not a fan of the unions, that's why I became a Conservative. When the unions do the right thing for their members, where they're working for their members, that's fine. When they go out on strike unnecessarily, and this rail strike is an unnecessary strike, in my view, that's not acceptable. It's impacting hard-working people all across the country. It's a good example of why the government is taking difficult decisions, why the union-backed Labour Party is refusing to do so, and why the government should stand firm on these instances.
But why do you think that LNER, which is entirely state-owned, is not using your legislation?
Well, I hope in time that legislation will be used, but we wouldn't need to use legislation if the unions didn't go out on strike when the proposition in front of them are pay rises of many thousands of pounds for average wages, which are much higher than the average in the country as a whole. Some of these drivers are already on £60,000. We need to go back to the core point, which is that people shouldn't be going on strike. These rail unions shouldn't be going on strike. It's not acceptable to impact people like this.
Lee Riley, you are the Housing Minister. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Good luck with your initiative. Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. So here we are on a Tuesday morning, and you'll be poking your nose out the door behind the curtains and see what it's like out there. No need to worry. Here's Alex Burkle with the weather update.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkle here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. It's Tuesday, the 30th of January.
You're tuned into breakfast here on GB News with Eamonn Holmes and Isabel Webster. You're very welcome.
Breaking news overnight as the Democratic Unionist Party agrees to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland, but not everyone's on board.
Yes, the message from the DUP to London and Brussels is we've jumped, now you jump too. But controversy as political opponents have access to what's going on in the private meeting.
The world on the brink. Despite new sanctions against Iran, Rishi Sunak and the United States continue to call for peace in the Middle East.
We are not looking for a war with Iran. We are not looking to escalate the tensions any more than they already have been escalating. In fact, everything we've done has been designed to try to de-escalate those tensions.
This morning, to breed or not to breed, that's the question we're asking as we debate whether it's selfish to have more than 2 children.
Also, head Rochdale whistleblower and hero Maggie Oliver speaks to us ahead of the sentencing of the Rotherham grooming gang ringleader.
And in sport, Blackburn knocked Wrexham out of the FA Cup. There's another live golf defection. And Marcus Rashford's night out ends up costing him £650,000. I'm sure he had a really nice night.
Hi, good morning. It's going to turn increasingly sunny for most of us as we go through today, but then some very strong winds are on the cards tomorrow. I'll have the details shortly.
Well, a big story emanating from Northern Ireland today. After 2 years, it's all back on again. The DUP has endorsed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland after those 2 years of protest.
Yes, and after a marathon 5-hour meeting overnight, DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has taken a leap of faith and secured the backing of his party.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
Well, the deal is now subject to the UK government implementing the agreed legislation.
What will that legislation be? We're joined by GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who's right across all of this, and a very late night it was before they were able to make that announcement. But Dougie, we're not over the line yet.
No, we're a little way from it. There will be now a timetable put in place. It will start today, of course, and tomorrow we expect that legislation that Geoffrey Donaldson has alluded to go through Westminster, and then probably Saturday this week, I would imagine, that we will see a speaker elected to the House behind us. And of course, that will herald in a Sinn Féin First Minister, and that is causing problems in some loyalist areas of Northern Ireland. In fact, last night it appears that political opponents had access to what was going on in that private meeting and were tweeting it out, and that held everything back by some hours. And of course the press conference, I mean, I wasn't getting clear of the press conference till after 2 o'clock this morning. So it shows you what there is to play for here, because of course there are very, very thin margins here and electorally, and of course the unionist vote here has always been split. You have the True Unionist Voice, you have the Ulster Unionist Party, and then you have the largest unionist party, and that's of the DUP. And when the last elections came here, the TUV stood, split the vote, and the DUP lost 2 votes, which left them as the second party in Stormont behind us. And Sir Geoffrey Donaldson will have to get faith back into that electorate to say to them, the deal that I have got is a good deal, and it's better for Northern Ireland. And in amongst that is still things to play for, such as triangular trading, which allows us to deal with the rest of the world. But what I have seen of the deal, it does do away with a lot of the regulation and paperwork that has been in place. And of course, Britain is about to face exactly the same thing, with checks of EU goods coming in to the mainland UK. And of course, that will cause the price of stuff to go up because, well, there's more paperwork involved. So last night, Sir Geoffrey went to his party. He has the blessing of the party executive, and it is a political risk for him, but he assures us that it's worth taking.
OK, and you're actually saying that the meeting was bugged last night. I mean, that is incredible as to what went on there. But the main thing is, and it's just very important to emphasise to our UK audience in general, that people in Northern Ireland have been governless for 2 years. Our health service is in absolute chaos. Our roads are in chaos. All sorts of civic things just not functioning because the DUP are not sitting as the second biggest party in that building behind you.
That's totally correct, Eamonn. And of course, if a budget can't be set, well, they have to put a 3-year budget in place in order for the public sector to be paid. And it is mainly around civil servants, as those, including the police force of Northern Ireland, that are looking at money for overtime, civil servants looking for extra pay and pay parity. And that now all will be on the in tray of whichever minister comes into place. So it is going to be quite quick, but it will be a hectic few weeks after that, as unions will be the first at the doors behind us to ask for their pay settlements to be put in place, and then followed by everyone else who wants their infrastructure looked after, and that will be top of the list at Stormont.
Dougie Beattie, thanks very much indeed. Now, Labour are set to unveil plans today to create jobs and to, in their words, turbocharge the pharmaceutical research and development. Sir Keir Starmer's party says under its plan, the investment in the new life science sector could be increased by £10 billion a year. Well, joining us now to tell us more is the Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle. Good morning. Welcome to the programme. Peter, tell us exactly what these plans involve.
Well, at the moment, we have a situation where global R&D spend in the UK has halved over the last decade. And our export share as a market has fallen also very considerably. So we need to make sure that we can get back and start supporting our life sciences sector here. We've been working really closely with the life sciences sector, and we've come up with a strategy today which has been endorsed by the sector itself, and that includes long-term funding to make sure we can leverage private sector funding to capitalise on the best of government investment. That also gives stability into the long term, which is what people really crave. We're going to set up an office of regulatory innovation. That means that when innovations come through, whether it be the private pharma sector or through the research centre from universities or elsewhere, we can expedite it through the regulatory system so it can benefit the economy and benefit people in their health service really quickly. And we're going to make the NHS the best place to innovate. That means that when innovations do come through, the NHS has got to be a better place to adopt the innovation and spread it right through the country. That's why I'm launching this plan today jointly with Wed Streeting, our Shadow Health Secretary.
And just run that funding past me again. You talk about it being £10 billion and it will be helped by the private sector, but just explain exactly how you would fund that £10 billion.
So what we've seen at the moment is things like the lack of planning, ease of getting planning through means that there's a restriction in lab space, but also because of the instability I mentioned a moment ago, we're seeing a fall in inward investment into the life sciences sector here in the pharmaceutical sector. So what we've seen is that there's been such a fall in investment since 2012 that what we want to do, and we all aspire to, is get back to the 2012 levels of export for the pharmaceutical companies and get through to the global R&D share again. We'll do that by supporting the sector, and for that growth to return would trigger £10 billion worth of investment by the pharmaceutical companies themselves and the creation of 77,500 jobs to support that expansion. Now, this isn't us making it up. This is what the pharmaceutical and research companies have told us directly themselves they are capable of. What they need is a partner in government rather than government creating all the instability at the moment. So just one thing, we will reform the planning process so that planning for new lab space is prioritised and expedited through the planning process. Because right now we've seen things like AstraZeneca applying for investment from its global parent company being turned down for various reasons because they don't see Britain as the best partner for it. We missed out on a £350 million direct investment, which would have led to billions of pounds over the years to come. We need to capitalise on all of this, and that will create thousands of jobs and billions of pounds worth of investment.
So just to be clear, by offering support, if Labour was in government, there wouldn't be a single penny of taxpayers' money spent to generate this £10 billion of private funding?
I've been consulting with pharma companies, with cancer research charities and other parts of the life sciences sector here. They have not asked and they recognise the constraints on our economy at the moment. Their priority is not getting more money out of government in direct funding. It is creating the right regulatory environment. It's making better use of the money that already is going into the system. It is about reforming the planning system that we have, and it is also about stability in government. Because at the moment we have on average one new science minister every year under the Conservative government. We had one science minister for 9 years with the previous Labour government. This is the instability that has been really damaging the ability for pharma companies to inwardly invest and also increase our global share of exports. Our global share of exports has fallen from 9% to 4% in the last decade. We've got to get that back up to 9%. By doing so, we will create 77,500 jobs and £10 billion worth of inward investment into our country.
I want to ask you, whilst we've got you, about the rail strikes. Lots of commuters, frankly, in hell at the moment with relentless interrupted services. Labour, of course, the party of the unions. Do you agree with what the Prime Minister's saying? He's complaining about these rail strikes and the fact that these rail bosses, frankly, not only are they not delivering on, A, what they're supposed to do, provide a rail service, but B, they're not using the new minimum service legislation, which, of course, Labour opposed.
Well, I don't think Rishi Sunak is in a position to accuse anyone else of not delivering. He has failed to deliver on his 5 pledges, he has failed to get our growth into our economy, and he's failed to fix our public services. So that's the first point. The second point is that we said, the reason we opposed the minimum standards legislation is we said that it doesn't work in transport in France and all of the other countries that they're pointing to. We said that this isn't a problem you can legislate your way through, and we were right. What we see with this government, with the Rwanda bill, with the minimum services bill, they focus on legislation that will not work. And now we have another set of widespread strikes. What the government could be doing and should be doing is negotiating with decency, with diligence and statecraft to get our country through this problem, because it can be solved. We've seen when they apply themselves, they can sort out some of these industrial issues, as we've seen with the nurses. But with transport, we had Grant Shapps, if you remember many of his jobs back ago when he was Transport Secretary. He refused to meet the transport unions for 6 to 9 months because he felt that he liked the aggro and he thought it would be more difficult for Labour. What he did was create a very deep-seated set of problems and acrimony between the unions and government. Until they actually get around the table and solve this, then we're going to end up in the situation we're in now. You can't legislate your way out of these problems. You can only negotiate.
OK, but just to be clear, I mean, will you condemn bonuses of £1 million for bosses, for example, at Arriva, a 61% pay rise when customers and commuters have seen nothing but disruption for the entirety of 2023?
Well, of course, with the rail operators, we are putting forward a set of proposals as a Labour Party, as a prospective plan for government to fundamentally reform the status of the rail network in our country, because there are fundamental problems with it. Until we get that fundamental reform, what we're going to see is money being shoveled into the wrong places and not shoveled into the places we need it, which is investment in our rail system, and finally finding ways to keep the over-inflation increases, as we've seen in the past, being passed on to commuters who are long suffering in this country.
Shadow Science, Innovation and Tech. Thanks very much indeed. Now we're going to focus on international tensions. The Prime Minister has urged Iran to de-escalate the situation after 3 US soldiers were killed on a US base in Jordan over the weekend. Iran's denied responsibility for the attack. The Pentagon says it's not looking for a war with Iran, but will do what is needed to protect troops. Well, earlier, both the US and the UK imposed further sanctions on Iran, including senior Iranian officials and gangs that targeted critics of the Middle Eastern country. Well, let's speak now to the former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, about this and the other politics doing the rounds this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Look, lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage, but I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible for a number of the situations that we're seeing in that region, which is now, for the very first time, it seems to me, having a direct impact on the West, on whether it's on the UK with HMS Diamond in the Red Sea, or whether it's the sad death of those 3 US service personnel on the border of Syria and Jordan, and 35 others injured. So it is a real increase in tensions, and it's having a real direct impact on the UK and the US.
There are always tensions in the Conservative Party as well, aren't there? It's one thing you can always bang.
I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you're talking about.
Endless psychodrama. Kemi Badenoch, always favourite to be the next leader of the party. She was out and about on the airwaves on Sunday, distancing herself, saying that the rebels within the party were not her friends. And then you look at the front of the papers this morning, and it appears that she's in a WhatsApp group with her long-term friend and colleague, and of course your former boss, Michael Gove, in a WhatsApp group entitled Evil Plotters. Now, I believe this is to do with Nadine Dorries' book, and she talked about the evil plotters within it. But perhaps a poor choice, a bit tin-eared?
Perhaps a slightly, ironic attempt to sort of, I think anybody that has got hold of Nadine's book, and I have to say it's something that's a bit further down on my reading list, and probably available from all good libraries, I'd imagine. I haven't read it, but I think, yes, it's probably a tongue-in-cheek, eye-rolling sort of group to sort of clearly make it clear that people that are either in that group or in the Conservative Party, I mean, it's a load of old nonsense, Nadine's book, anyway.
I mean, we know Michael Gove does have form for plotting. We saw what happened with Boris Johnson, but you believe Kemi Badenoch, she's not involved in any, just finally?
I believe Kemi entirely, what she said at the weekend, that she fully supports the Prime Minister, and that's what every Conservative should be doing. Every MP, every councillor, every activist, you need to support the Prime Minister, you need to support the leadership of the party. That is the only way that the Conservatives will have a chance of winning the next general election.
Charlie Rowley, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for coming in bright and early. Right, the time's 7:18. Let's take a look at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom this morning. And the Prime Minister has accused rail bosses of refusing to use his new legislation to limit the impact of the latest round of strikes. This comes as the rail drivers' union ASLEF is beginning another series of rolling strikes and overtime bans until February the 6th. Ministers had been warned that the legislation was doomed to fail, and we'll be speaking to ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan this morning, just after 9, right here on Breakfast. A move to block the government's flagship Rwanda bill in the Lords last night was voted down by a majority of 122. Peers voted 206 to 84 against a motion that was designed to block it. And 2 more people aged 20 and 22 have been arrested in connection with the deaths of 2 teenage boys who were fatally stabbed in Bristol at the weekend. A 44-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy have already been arrested, and they remain in custody. What's happening with the weather? Alex Burkle has all the details.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
Wins, wins, wins. Anyway, time for the Great British Giveaway, talking about wins, and you could really be in as our next big winner. The incredible cash prize stands at
£18,000. So if you want to be in with a chance, here's how you do it.
This is your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. And if you're thinking, I'd never win something like that, listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Right, so up next we're having a debate about having children, and it's all brought around by a couple of women in the newspapers over the weekend who were wringing their hands about should they have this dilemma, should they have a child or not, and the reason, not can they afford a child or whatever, it's is it good for the planet? Okay, so the question is to breed or not to breed.
See you after the break.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
We're going to talk about babies now, or not babies who become big babies and then teenagers and children in general. Now, the number, is there a number you should have? You see, in Ireland, Isabel, we always looked in things and you thought the English have 2.2 children and the Irish have...
8.
Easy. Yeah, I went to school with people who had 12, siblings, There was...
I pitied the mothers. Now I'm a mum, I'm like, crikey, that sounds horrendous. I mean, how many years of your life are you pregnant for if you're 12 children?
But you're the 2.2 version, you're 2 children, whereas I have propagated around the country.
Around the country?
Right around the country.
This is a top news story now. Tell me more.
I have 4 children. So I do. And the thing is, now, it's not only a moral question, it's not only a financial question, it's an environmental question as well.
Each child has a carbon footprint, don't they? So the number of babies born here last year dropped to the lowest in 2 decades. Yet some are now feeling guilty about having too many children. Many, and you think of the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, saying that rising global populations are putting a strain on the planet, and the more that 2 children is not good for it.
So should you feel quite bad if you do want more than 2 children? Is it selfish? Joining us is parenting coach and mum of 2, Nicole Ratcliffe. Good morning, Nicole. Nicole believes... Yeah, Nicole, you believe we shouldn't feel guilty for having more children. And then a friend of the show, director of Climate Media Coalition, Donncha McCarthy, who says we should try and stick to 2. And you don't have any children, Donncha, yourself. And are you happy with that as you enter your dotage now? As you look back at life, are you happy with that?
In my 60s, I look at my friends with teenage kids and I go, how do you cope with it? It's absolutely nightmare.
How is the planet coping with it, Donncha?
Not very well. When my dad was born, there was 1.6 billion people on the planet. When I was born, there was 3. There's now 8, and we're heading towards 11. What does that mean for the rest of nature?
What does it mean in the UK if the birth rate is falling here? What does that say about us?
It says that women are actually working, and they're looking for a quality of life, and they don't want to spend their lives pregnant. They don't want to spend 12 years of their lives pregnant. But you asked, what does it mean, Eamonn? I just want to draw a circle, if I like. So I warned the producer I was going to do this. So I'm 64 years of age. That circle represents all of the wildlife that was on the planet when I was born, just 64 years ago. And in that time, with the 8 billion of us that are now there, with all the food, wood, transport, housing that we have to provide for them, we have destroyed 70% of nature.
And what would you say?
In one generation. And I just think, Eamonn, there's a moral issue here. How can we pass that on to the next generation?
OK, I get that. But say you live in, Milton Keynes or watching us this morning, whatever. Why would that be your responsibility? Are you contributing to that?
Every single child in an industrial country like ours is around 500 tonnes of carbon over their lifetime. That's equivalent of 1,000 years of electricity for a household. So each child has an impact. And what we're saying is 1 is great, 2 is plenty, and 3 is selfish.
Gosh, OK, well, Nicole, I mean, how do you feel about those kinds of words? I mean, lots of parents don't actually plan to have 3 and a third one comes along. I mean, does it suddenly make people almost feel some sort of moral dilemma for their own contraceptive failings? I mean, it just enters a whole new sort of moral maze, doesn't it, if you have language like that?
I'll be honest, I feel quite angry by that kind of language. As one of 4... for me, no, I'm sorry. We've got a lovely family, and the idea of that 3 is selfish is just.
But what about this? What about the comments Donica was making there about the destruction of our wildlife in 1 generation as a consequence of a huge rise in our population? I mean, that's partly. Did you say you're 1 of 4? Your mum's
4, absolutely. But then, actually, if I've got friends that don't have children and their lifestyle is very, very different to our lifestyle, so. We have children and we're kind of in the same sort of area. We don't really go on many holidays. We don't really do much. Whereas those that don't tend to have children have got more money. So they've got more free money, so they tend to have more holidays. And their carbon footprint could be higher in other ways. So
I think that's a very, very good point, Nicole. I just want to get Donica's opinion on the point that Nicole's making there.
Well, this story came from a family that wrote in the Daily Mail that she's having 3 kids, and she was saying they fly every year to Canada. So every extra child is 2.6 tonnes a flight. So that 1 child taking 1 flight for every year will be the equivalent of 10 houses worth of electricity. You turn off everything in a house for 10 years for that 1 flight for that child.
But Donica, just to say, have fewer children doesn't mean that the people who don't have kids aren't committing climate crimes. A lot of people I know that don't have kids have 1 or more dogs, and the carbon footprint of a dog, for example, is, I believe, worse than a 4x4 Range Rover.
Don't be stupid. How high is it?
Well, because Donica's probably more equipped to explain that, but I believe it's got a high carbon footprint.
One of the problems with large dogs is that they eat a lot of meat, and meat has got very high carbon footprint. But the point I would like to make is really important, is that we're not advocating compulsory family planning. That's a terrible thing to do. What we are saying is that when women have access to family planning, the human right to family planning, to right to have a work, and right to have an education, what happens is the birth rate falls naturally. And what I think is tragic is the UK government and the US government have cut funds for education and family planning for girls in the developing world.
But Donica, we started in the developing world. I was going to say we started by saying actually the birth rate's going down in this country. I mean, I just wonder in all of this, Nicole, if you think that there is a risk that people who are trying to go about living as good citizens end up actually at the mercy, perhaps, of what could be seen as eco-zealotry, that this strays into too far, talking about your dogs, your flights, the number of children. It actually just turns people off from the debate altogether.
I think it's absolutely awful because, for me, there's something where if somebody says, because I did read this, that people are choosing to not have children, not have that 3rd child, not have children at all because of climate change. And for me, I kind of think, well, actually, that is not somebody that is driven to have children. To have children is something that is inbuilt within us. And if you are somebody that wants to have children, you can't switch that urge off. There's people out there spending every single penny they have got to have a child. And if they're made to feel guilty because they are contributing to climate change, and this, I feel quite offended by the idea that bringing a much loved child into the world could be deemed as a bad thing to do.
Is there anything, Nicole, is there anything we've touched upon today or anything that Donica has said that does make you feel more guilty or more reticent about having children?
No, but what I will say is the government could do more to actually improve the way that parents are raising their children and what they do to support them. So and they won't, because they make too much money from the baby industry. So, for example, breastfeeding is totally free, but yet they don't actually do much to support breastfeeding because they get so much money from the formula industry. Actually, if they want to start incentivizing things that are free and healthy, breastfeeding is a really good place to start. Let's start destigmatizing things like pre-love and second-hand. Let's get rid of that. So we're actually being sustainable and smart, because, again, that's something that can help in generations to come with bullying. If we get away from, the whole, everything's got to be brand new and named. Actually, let's look at being a smart country. Let's be a smart world. And let's be sustainable and actually pass things around, and that be the norm. But they won't, because they make far too much money in taxes.
Fascinating, fascinating. Donica, final word to you.
Yeah, I would think that where we can agree is that we need to go more government action. What the government needs to do is to fund women's rights around the world like we used to do. Make sure women have access to family planning, girls have access to education, and women have the right to work. That's what we need to do, and that's actually a positive thing for women and for the planet.
And Donica, where is the biggest threat coming from? Where's the biggest rise in population?
The southern Africa is where the huge population explosion is happening, and it's where the government has cut the funding most for women's rights.
Foreign aid budget.
Yeah.
OK.
All right, Donica
thank you very much
McCarthy
indeed.
and, I've lost your name now, sorry, Nicole Ratcliffe. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Gosh, what an interesting debate. I'm sure lots of you at home have plenty to say on that. What do you think? It's such a confusing one, I think. I mean, I totally understand the climate argument. When you see the destruction to our wildlife, it breaks my heart. And I think about the number of nappies I went through with my little ones. 11 million a year, apparently, in the UK go to landfill. Awful. But I really, really strongly object to somebody in authority telling me how many kids I can and can't have. I just think it's a fascinating debate.
But you're done now, aren't you?
Oh, I'm absolutely done. Two and through.
Yeah. I think there might maybe another couple.
Have a couple?
But I always think they should be able to keep me in my old age instead of me having to work to keep them.
That's what it's all for, yeah.
That's what you hope.
Yes.
Paul Coyte, you have 2 children?
I quite like being a dad, and I think there's quite a lot of emotion involved in this. It's very well to be able to go, well, these teenagers, I don't have kids, and I think once you have kids, then you truly know what love is. Yeah. And someone said that to me many years ago, and I thought, oh, really? And I truly did. And so the emotion's been taken out of it, and I think that's a real shame, and that's what it's all about.
Kids should always look at their parents and say, there with my mum or my dad are the only people in the world that want me to do better. They really want me to the best for me all the time. I mean, I suppose then there are the sad stories of people who don't have very good parents. That's the thing. Should we talk a bit of sport?
Shall we do that?
Wrexham, Isabel's dream team.
Well, I thought I'd do that for Isabel today.
Yeah.
Things to do with Brian Reynolds.
It's bad news, though.
FA Cup.
Yeah, messed it up.
Yeah,
Ryan's not going to Wembley. He's not going to be going to Wembley, so therefore I doubt you'll be going to Wembley either. They lost 4-1 to Blackburn last night. Blackburn will go through to the 5th round and play Newcastle United. You know they're going to do it's 28th of February, so now they're moving the FA Cup. And see, this is when we start getting upset. The fact that it's the 5th round is now going to be during the week. So it used to be on the Saturdays, put it in during the week.
Whatever they try and do to take the importance away from the FA Cup, it always comes back bigger and stronger than ever. There's always, the tales to tell.
I agree.
Newcastle against Blackburn, an interesting story. Alan Shearer, of course, won the league title with Blackburn. Of course. And he's a big Newcastle supporter, did so well there as well.
Did you see him in the crowd? He was in the crowd at Fulham, at the Fulham game.
Yeah.
And it said it's the first time he's actually been in with the fans since 1995. So he's gone in with the crowd. And I've known some ex-footballers that have done that, and they've just stood in there. And obviously they kind of want to get recognised. So he's got his hat on. So all the fans started singing the Alan Shearer song around him, and then he was asked, well, how did it feel? Uncomfortable? He went, actually, I loved it. It was great. So I think that's great. So he's a true Newcastle fan, who, by the way, are playing Aston Villa tonight at Villa Park. So that'll be some game. Yeah. That will be some game.
I'm going to Wolves on Thursday night.
Oh, you really?
Yeah. It's a good idea, but then it's my mobility. It's a sort of bit unknown. Can I get around? Can I get up and down steps? And
I hope they look after you.
That. Well, I'm not asking for special treatment.
Well, I am.
Not much.
How
are the prawn sandwiches at Wolverhampton Wanderers anyway? I'd look after you. No, it'll be great.
Now listen, Dwayne Chambers, a runner, right?
This is amazing.
Athlete. Now Dwayne Chambers is older than me.
He is, yeah.
Right? And he's making making a comeback on the indoor circuit.
He's actually double our age.
He's 45.
Exactly, older than Eamonn, that's what he said.
I'm 44.
Yeah.
He's 45.
Round the chest, yeah.
I've had a harder life than him, though. Right, tell us. Right, if I remember correctly, he was banned.
He was banned for anabolic steroids. We were talking about Valieva earlier. So he was banned, but now he's making a comeback. Now he is the fastest 45-year-old. He's broken the world record for a 45-year-old sprinter. See, I'm trying to work this out. Is that if you're going to come back as an athlete and then you're going to make a comeback, so he's 45, and he's going to be racing in the UK Athletics Championships, the indoors, against runners that are like half his age.
Really?
So, yeah. So, but 60 metres is what, 6 seconds? 6 seconds? Is it harder to come back as a 45-year-old, do you reckon, to run a long distance, because you're a middle distance guy, than it would be for the power events? So it's all over very quickly.
Well, it depends on your thighs.
We'll be back to thighs again.
So back to thighs.
It's always back to the chafing again.
When I was young, Isabel, these were no, they weren't. No, they weren't quite that big, but they were. That's the powerhouse. That's the powerhouse.
I should mention that Eamonn is in shorts right now. That's why we can see. Look at the muscle on that. God, dear. Yeah. So he's going to be having a go. And can you imagine what a great story, though? 45 years old.
It's a brilliant story.
I don't think you can do it as a 45-year-old.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Not
he could kill himself.
Some kind of chemical.
It's anabolics again.
Enhanced.
Don't tempt him. He's already been down that road. We don't want to do that again. No. We don't want to get down that road again.
That's good. Where's that going to be? That's the UK Athletics.
That's the UK Indoor Athletics Championships, which is taking on soon. So, yeah.
Good
so
night.
there we are.
OK, thank you very much. Well, we'll wish him well. It'd certainly be... These are the things that get us attracted to sports and get us watching.
It's a great story.
Thank you for your
best thighs in athletics.
Thank you,
Paul Coit there, back again at 8:20.
Now, it's all kicking off in France. We'll be talking about this in Making the News coming up. French farmers there are taking to the streets. They're protesting EU red tape. And apparently there's only 3 days' worth of food or something left in the French capital. All the details after this.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not
eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
We're having a little chat here with Nikki Hodgson and Alex Armstrong, and they're going to have a chat with you about what's in the papers today, guys. Very good to see you. And we're talking about Paris and the farmers' dispute in Paris. Now, you know, I'm a great fan of farmers, and I think they have it very, very tough. And I think people often don't take it seriously. But the thing is, Alex, without the farmers, Nikki, sorry, you're talking about this one. No, who's talking about
Nikki. Both
Nikki, sorry. The thing about it, we mess with the farmers, we mess with our food supply. We have seen what's happened with Ukraine and shortages of food and grain and all that sort of thing. What do you make of this and what the farmers are having to do in France?
Yeah, so farmers in France are saying pretty much what farmers across Europe are saying, which is that they suffer from very low pay. There's a lot of red tape in terms of getting their products to market. And there are environmental policies which might be good for the planet, but they affect their farming and their profits. So the farmers in Paris are basically saying we are determined to cut off the food supply to Paris. They've only got 3 more days worth of food, which you can imagine if you're French living in Paris, you're thinking, where's my next meal coming from?
Food capital of the world,
right? This is going to be very offensive. I think this is very persuasive and clever action from the farmers, actually, and I laud them. French are very good at putting on a protest. It's something we do terribly in Britain.
Well, this apparently is the motorway into Paris. They're blocking all major highways with their tractors. It's the second day of these blockades, and they're demanding, as you were saying, Nikki, just prices and loosened regulations. And these are pictures coming to us from Reuters news agency live from Paris.
They're hoping that hundreds more tractors will join them as they close in on the capital, so to speak.
Well, the one thing the French are very good at is industrial action.
Yes, very much so.
I believe this isn't the first country to take similar action. Actually, the French are a bit slow on the uptake with this. The Germans have been doing it. Was it the Dutch as well?
Yeah. The Dutch famously have done this quite recently, actually. So this is a European-wide problem. Interestingly enough, the Parisian farmers referred to Jeremy Clarkson as one of their inspirations.
Yes,
his documentary on Amazon as the big inspiration for this. They go, despite Britain having left the EU, you obviously face still similar problems. Actually bonkers.
And you see, in Holland, and Isabel's got a bit of an in here, she knows more about this than I would, but they're being hit hard with the amount of cattle, grazing cattle, that they can have. And that's one of their big protests, that they're having to reduce the amount of cattle.
Because, our traditional black and white cows, the Frisians, they're from Friesland in north of Holland. But, it is interesting because it was largely farmers in this country who voted for Brexit in huge swathes, didn't they? And yet they aren't seeing benefits that they thought they would see.
Absolutely.
It's a crisis in farming rather than necessarily an EU or a UK legislative.
I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. We should, the public will be very interested in hearing. Is this is not just a Britain thing. This is a European-wide problem. And in fact, the fact of the matter is that the Tories bigged up being able to save farming as part of Brexit, and they failed to deliver on that promise alongside a tranche of other Brexit promises they failed to deliver on, which, if you're a Brexit-supporting person, you'd be dismayed to hear, because these are all the things we were supposed to take back control of, which we failed to do. I think this is going to be a really interesting development. I wonder whether this will inspire some British farmers to take similar action.
No, I don't think
We're
it's
just
going
too lazy in this country to protest properly, though, Alex.
Don't say that.
We are.
You've seen the train.
No, but that's what I
railway
love.
guys, they learn from them.
But I love to watch the French. They know how to put a proper protest on.
Yeah.
It's all because of the revolution and we didn't have one here and all that rubbish.
Get Mick Whelan into the NFU and that'll be it.
I tell you, if you ever worry or wonder what a farming life is like, the BBC are very good at these sort of programmes. They have one on a Sunday evening, I think it is, on BBC Two called This Farming Life, and they follow 4 or 5 farmers all around the UK, and they look at how harsh it is. And, you know, programmes like Country File, you see what goes on there. Well, Country File tends to try and gloss over and make it all, you know, for city people like us about going for a walk from the fields on a Sunday, and, you know, that's not really what it's about. But you ask me, farming, I couldn't do it.
No, it's one of the hardest jobs.
It's a hard
like
job.
fishing, another really, really hard industry. I've got to say, I do like one of the details of this report. It says that last night the farmers barbecued their own meat for dinner as they were having a little rest from the protest, and they played Madness's One Step Beyond, blasted it out from their speakers as another sign-off to the powers that be. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting choice. Wouldn't have thought they'd go for British
a British anthem.
The EU has urged legislators and policymakers to abandon gendered language, including no man's land. You can't say that. You see, I suppose I just speak as a man, and when James T. Kirk says, and to go where no man has gone before, I see that as meaning mankind.
Yeah. Human.
I don't see that as men only and not women and whatever. So am I wrong with that, Nikki?
Well, the feminist argument is there are so many examples of the word man being used first that we end up with this kind of thought that men are dominant. And, you know, feminists think that anyway about all aspects of life. And I have some sympathy with that. I am a feminist and I do kind of get on board with that. But the one thing I will say is this won't work, because actually every time you try to legislate for language, everybody goes, no, I'm protesting. I'm not going to be forced to say that. And we've got loads of examples of that in history. I mean, in the 18th century Britain, Jonathan Swift, very famous writer, he tried to do the same and sort of like iron out problems in the English language. He called them inkhorn terms, these like words that he tried to use. He was in favour of kind of cleaning it up because it was, you know, a mongrel language. But he completely failed. He's like a writer that we remember for his works, but not for his protesting about language. You know, the French themselves, they have the Académie Française, don't they, where they try and preserve the French that they want us to use, not things like le chewing gum or whatever that people use. Yeah, all that.
Walkman, I remember at school.
So, you know what
you can try, but you won't succeed, is what I'm saying.
What's hilarious about this is that, you know, at least the Mediterranean European languages all have masculine and feminine words.
That's true.
So what are you saying? You're going to completely uproot their entire language and start again?
True.
But that's interesting in and of itself, because the words that are feminine or masculine also, again, colour people's views on what maybe a masculine profession is or a masculine object versus a feminine one.
So
what you're saying is it's even worse in France if you are a feminist.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Okay. We're lucky that we don't have, gendered nouns.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, I mean, no man's land is an interesting phrase. They would replace that with unclaimed territory, which is very sterile, isn't it?
Very sterile.
I don't see the problem in preserving historical terms.
Well, you can't say Joe Public. That should become average citizen. I mean,
they've got to get a bit more creative,
isn't it? It's just like HR's taken over. It's like an HR workplace taken over the country.
If you're going to come up with an alternative, make it creative, make it interesting, so people want to say it, not this horrible, bland language.
There's another one of those, like master of ceremonies has become host. I mean, how boring is that?
It's very boring.
I don't mind being called a master as a woman. I don't mind. You know.
We encourage it, in fact.
Absolutely.
Yes, but and also, you know, as a man, I wouldn't object to you being called a master.
How would you feel about being mistress of ceremonies, though, Eamonn?
No, I think that's too. No.
There we go.
No, you got me there. Right, you got me there. Guys, thank you both very, very much indeed. Very entertaining, and they're going to be back in 45 minutes' time. Okay.
For now, let's go check on what the weather's up to today. Alex Burkill has all your details.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, very good morning to you. 8 o'clock. It's fast approaching 8 on this Tuesday morning, the 30th of January.
You're very welcome to breakfast with Eamonn Holmes and Isabel Webster.
Breaking news overnight, the Democratic Unionist Party has agreed to a deal to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland and get Stormont back to work after 2 years.
The DUP's message to London and Brussels: we've jumped, now you jump too. With the legislation going through the House, Northern Ireland could have a government within days.
The world on the brink. Despite new sanctions against Iran, Rishi Sunak and the United States continue to call for peace in the Middle East.
We are not looking for a war with Iran. We are not looking to escalate the tensions any more than they already have been escalating. In fact, everything we've done has been designed to try to de-escalate those tensions.
Prime Minister goes into battle over rail strikes as he blasts union bosses over what he calls a campaign of contempt for passengers. But Labour has hit back.
What he did was create a very deep-seated set of problems and acrimony between the unions and government. Until they actually get around the table and solve this, then we're going to end up in the situation we're in now. You can't legislate your way out of these problems. You can only negotiate.
We'll be speaking to union boss Mick Whelan later on the programme, just after 9 o'clock, for his response.
Also this morning, the Rotherham whistleblower and hero Maggie Oliver will be speaking to us ahead of the sentencing of a grooming gang ringleader later today.
And the sport, it's all about drinks, drugs and defections. Marcus Rashford is fined, Camilla Valieva is banned, and Tyrrell Hatton becomes a very rich man indeed.
Hi, good morning. It's going to turn increasingly sunny for most of us as we go through today, but then some very strong winds are on the cards tomorrow. I'll have the details shortly.
Lots of you have been getting in touch. Thank you so much for your emails. Interesting always to see which of the topics that sort of pique your interest, and lots of you furious about this council tax rise that's being promised later in the year. Isabel in Glasgow says the council tax rise is a joke. All they'll be doing is bringing in money to fund management bonuses.
And we have the Housing Minister on the programme today, and he was talking about antisocial tenants. Catherine says, why should private landlords be expected to take the trouble-making tenants when they get thrown out of social housing?
Yeah, Laura says, we live in social housing. Our neighbour has had her music blasting minimum twice a week till the early hours. She's clearly an alcoholic, calls the ambulance on herself minimum once a week. Then when they arrive, she kicks them out. Under these new rules, she could be gone in a week. So Laura's all in favour of that, I think.
A lot of you talking about the rail strike as well, and we're going to be talking about that after 9 o'clock. The time now, 2 minutes past the hour of 8. Our top story this morning, the Democratic Unionist Party has endorsed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland. That is after 2 years of protest.
Yeah, there was a marathon 5-hour meeting overnight with the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, saying that he'd taken a leap of faith and managed to secure the backing of his party.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
Now, any deal is subject to the UK government implementing new legislation. And we're joined by political commentator Dr. John Coulter. John, right, obviously strides have been made. We're not over the line yet. What do we mean by new legislation? What legislation is the DUP looking for?
Well, good morning, folks, here from Northern Ireland. The situation is that we've proved once again that Irish politics is the art of the impossible. So the deal that the DUP will be looking will be a form of words which effectively neuters the Windsor framework. Now, the Windsor framework is not going to go away. The Irish Sea border at the present minute, as we talk now, is not going to go away. But we could calm the waters sufficiently to avoid a unionist civil war. And I think that behind all these deals, behind getting the DUP back into Stormont and restoring power sharing, is at the back of the mind of the DUP that there is going to be a realignment within unionism, but what we don't want is a 1998-style civil war that David Trimble faced when he kicked off power sharing then.
But let me ask you this, John. 2 years without government there, right?
One of the things that is coming down the track, hopefully, if the British government keep up their side of the bargain, is the £3.3 billion package to help public sector workers. Now, that won't fix everything, but it will help the cost of living crisis. A return of the Assembly won't fix everything, but it's a starting point, because what is really needed is a reform of how the Assembly governs. In other words, that one party, whether it be Sinn Féin as the largest party or the DUP as the second largest party, that if some legislation is coming up, some situation arises that they can't implement a veto and we're down for another 2 or 3 years. What we need is stable, concrete power sharing devolution. So reforms will have to be brought in to ensure that this sort of situation never happens again.
Yeah, although, you know, look, I'm not Northern Irish. You two clearly know far more about this, but as a sort of layperson looking in, I instantly think, how on earth will you reform this? Because we know how uniquely Northern Ireland has to be governed because of its past and the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, which requires such strict rules about the sharing of power. That veto, surely, to many, will feel very precious.
Yes, you've made a very valid point there, and you mentioned the Good Friday Agreement. Perhaps the time has come for the British government, for the parties in Northern Ireland, to renegotiate those parts of the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 that are perhaps now, a quarter of a century later, being a stumbling block to effective power sharing in Northern Ireland. Eamonn and I are veterans of the Troubles in terms of our journalistic reporting. We don't want to see us in Northern Ireland going back to those bad old days. So that is why I'm very emphatic that any power sharing reforms must be set in concretes of stone.
John, that's looking back. Looking forward, how quickly could we see Stormont up and running again?
I think it'll be very fast, Eamonn. Remember, Chris Heaton-Harris kicked the Assembly election ball down the road to February the 8th. So I'm looking at a situation where we could be up and running within days.
Okay,
good to hear.
Eyes on Belfast.
Let's hope that's true. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Now to the rail strikes. The Prime Minister has accused rail bosses of refusing to use his new legislation to limit the impact of the latest round of strikes on customers.
Now, this comes as the Rail Drivers Union, that's ASLEF, begins another series of rolling strikes and overtime bans. That will last until the 6th of February.
However, ministers were warned the legislation was always doomed to fail. We'll be speaking to ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan just after 9 o'clock about all of this.
Joining us now, our political correspondent Catherine Forster on this one to tell us more. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Eamonn and Isabel. Yes, it wasn't supposed to be like this, was it? It's about a year and a half now since these strikes began. It feels like forever. And although the government have settled with Unite, settled with the RMT, there is still this ongoing strike with ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union. Now, the government made a great noise about bringing in minimum strikes legislation. And that was supposed to guarantee that train operators would make sure that staff provided 40% of the normal timetable in the event that strikes took place. But of these operators, 16 of them, not one single one has chosen to implement that. So this minimum strikes legislation has effectively been totally ignored by the train operators. And in fact, the only train operator, LNER, which is completely owned by the government, they had thought of trying to implement it. And when ASLEF got wind of that, they said, OK, well, we'll strike for another 5 days from the 5th to the 11th of February as a punishment. So LNER had a rethink, said they wouldn't do that, and the strike was cancelled. So you can see the difficulty. The train operators worry that the legislation's too complicated. They worry about worsening relations further than ever. The government, of course, hugely disappointed and very, very frustrated, because they feel now they've given the operators the legal powers to deal with this, and yet they are not doing. Now, the government would also say that the offer on the table for train drivers currently get an average of about 60,000 a year. The offer would give them 65,000, and also, of course, that the rail industry has been massively subsidised by the government, hugely so during the pandemic, where almost nobody was travelling, vast amounts of money. And meanwhile, train operators are giving some of their bosses big bonuses and pay rises. And of course, who is suffering? Well, us, the travelling public, who again, are facing massive disruption to their journeys today and over the next few days.
OK, Catherine, thanks very much indeed.
The ringleader of a grooming gang in Rotherham will appear for sentencing later today. That will be a remote link. His name is Mohammed Akhtar, and he's admitted to raping a 13-year-old schoolgirl, which involved him plying her with drugs.
He has pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape and 2 counts of indecent assault, which took place between August 2001 and July 2002.
We're now joined by former detective Maggie Oliver, who's instrumental in what will happen today. Maggie, good morning to you. Today's a very important day, depending on what the sentence will be, and you've had a role to play in all of that. But how do you look at today? Is this the end of the road, or is this the beginning of many more sentencing?
Morning, Eamonn. I actually worked in Rochdale, not in Rotherham, so this case wasn't one that I was involved in. But the similarities are unavoidable. I think for me, though, Eamonn, this case probably raises more questions than it answers. This man, Mohammed Akhtar, he is already serving a lengthy prison sentence for raping and abusing other children. My questions are, why was this child not included in that original prosecution? I would guess that she's come forward. So I wonder whether he will be given longer in prison, because often the sentences run concurrently rather than consecutively. I think the good thing for me, though, Eamonn, is, I mean, you remember all the Rochdale case and the case of Ruby, the little girl who was made pregnant at 13. Now, in Ruby's case, we had a fetus. We knew who got her pregnant because we had DNA. And even that man was only charged with conspiracy to commit sexual activity with a child and out of prison in 4 years. So for me, this shows at least some progress in that this man is being charged with rape of a 13-year-old child. I was always horrified that, a man could rape a child of 13 and yet not be charged with rape and out of prison in less than 4 years. So that shows some progress, at least. But I think that this again shows me that this is a very reactive case, in that the police and the CPS have gone after Mohammed Akhtar because he was an easy target. I would have liked to see a much bigger picture about what's gone on, that the whole lot, where he could have been dealt with for many of other cases other than the ones that he was originally convicted of. Why has it taken so long to prosecute him for this little girl? It's over 20 years. How many others has he raped? They're the kind of questions that come to my mind because of what I know about other cases.
Maggie, I can't help but link this to other sort of court stories that have been doing the rounds in recent weeks. I mean, just yesterday, the parents of Barnaby Webber went into Downing Street to talk about the murder of their son, and they said that they feel they've been let down by the judicial system. We've had the Victims Commissioner talking about the new Victims Bill, saying that it just doesn't have any teeth and doesn't go far enough to protect victims. You're talking about the sentencing and people being let out after 4 years. Do we need to have a review, frankly, of the sort of sentencing, particularly, I think, around sexual abuse and paedophiles? Because there certainly seems to be this mismatch between the sort of sentences that some people can get and the other sentences of the most vulnerable in society. I mean, tell me who thinks that a 13-year-old girl should be impregnated and there aren't serious consequences for that?
But I think, and you are to take credit for this, Maggie, though, public perception has now changed, and what may have been tolerated in communities before now surely cannot be tolerated today. Attitudes must have changed.
I think you're dead right, Eamonn. And, you know, if there's one thing that I'm actually proud of, is that I've opened up the conversation around this, and the public now are fully aware of what's gone on. But Isabel, you are absolutely right. You know, I started my own charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, where we work with victims today, every day, and not just of grooming gangs, but of any kind of sexual violence. And the system is completely and utterly broken. It is like a lottery. You know, what kind of a service you get, what kind of charges are brought, whether resources are put into investigations. You know, only 2 weeks ago, we had the Rochdale Review publishing, and that was a horrific failure, the one that I resigned about. But what it's done, it has exposed again failures, just like in the post office scandal, to be honest, you know, cover-ups and protecting the organisation and not dealing with victims in a lawful and an ethical way. That they are the things that we have to see changed. You know, organisations, the police that have closed their eyes to these things, the report on Rochdale made it very clear that individuals lie behind the decisions not to put resources into these cases. And yet today, in all these years, right up to date, there has never been any senior officer held accountable. I think that the conversation has moved on, in that there is now complete public awareness of how the police and the courts and the CPS are failing victims repeatedly, and not just victims of grooming gangs, which, you know, as I know, absolutely destroys lives, not for 5 minutes, forever. And the damage done, I always say the abuse is one thing, that is horrendous. But when the police and the courts and the prosecutors fail to believe a child, fail to support them, judge them, that damage is even compounds the abuse far, far more. So you're dead right, Isabel. This isn't just about one child anymore. This is about a system that is unfit for purpose. And if we even think that less than 2 in every 100 reported rapes ever reaches court, that's not the ones that go unreported. We have a system there that is failing 98 of every 100 victims of sexual abuse. And, you know, for a country like the UK, that is not acceptable in any way, shape or form. And that's where my fight goes now. Every victim who is let down is damaged forever. What we need is a system that doesn't keep on repeating those same failures. And then we get an apology, and then an abuser gets a tap on the wrist. It's very much a postcode lottery about what happens to a paedophile who abuses children. I want to see so many changes, but I think conversations like this and raising awareness is how we will bring about those changes, if I'm honest.
Well, it's a big day for you, Maggie. Thank you and congratulations again, and all your work, which leads us to days like today. I hope they throw the book at him and lock him up for a long time.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Maggie Oliver.
OK, let's take a look at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom. And breaking news this hour, the former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to a 10-year prison sentence, accused of leaking state secrets. It marks his second conviction in recent months and just 10 days before the country's general election.
The bank, HSBC, has been fined £57.4 million by the Bank of England's Prudential Regulation Authority over serious failings on depositor protection. This dates back to 2015. It's the second highest penalty ever imposed by the financial watchdog.
A move to block the government's flagship Rwanda bill in the House of Lords was voted down last night by a majority of 122. And in a surprise intervention, Lord Kenneth Clarke, the Conservative former Chancellor, refused to back the bill, labelling it a step too far.
Time to get the weather update. Alex Burkle has that.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkle here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
Dear me, so much doom and gloom. The forecast isn't much better, but I tell you what might make you smile.
£1,500 every month for a whole year. What about that?
Yes, you could win that in our brand new Great British Giveaway. £18,000 in total is up for grabs.
And here's how you could win it.
There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won in the latest Great British Giveaway. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. Money to make each month just that little bit better. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Still to come, there have been lots of tweaks to the highway code in recent years, with pedestrian and cyclist prevalence. It hasn't made any difference to the safety of drivers. We're debating it in just a moment.
Do you think you could pass a highway code test?
Probably not.
No, I don't think I could either. Anyway, we're going to be putting you to the test and our guests on that right after this.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamonn, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, and Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none. Totally changed, especially in our cities. And so we do need to change our awareness, don't we, in order for everybody to be safe, not just the cyclists and the pedestrians, but also for the cars. Wouldn't you say?
Sure, I think it's unhelpful to say all drivers or the intimation that all drivers don't know anything about the highway code. That's demonstrably untrue. What is correct is that when I took my test 25 years ago, I had a knowledge of the highway code and probably promptly forgot everything about it. I understand the more important things like the speed limits and the distance that you need to keep in between the car in front of you and things like that. But what really is the story today is the danger for pedestrians and cyclists. And what this study by the RAC said was that as far as the highway code being fit for purpose with the new legislation, but it's legislation really that's only guidance, and it's for when a car, for example, this is just a basic example, when a car is turning left and there's a pedestrian or a cyclist who wants to cross that T-junction, then you're supposed to give right of way to the cyclist or the pedestrian. And I have to admit, 2 years ago when this legislation or the guidance was put out there, I haven't done it once. And I don't think I'm alone in doing it once. So that aspect of the new guidance for the highway code is not fit for purpose, because generally speaking, I haven't seen anyone do it.
No, but Danny, what would you say would be a good time period where we should, all of us, whether cyclist or whether a motorist, should resit a highway code test or a driving test in general?
Oh, God forbid that, Eamonn. There's no way I'd pass my test, mate. I don't think you would. I'm not sure many middle-aged men and women would pass their test again, Eamonn. God forbid that. I think, if the government was really serious about pedestrian safety and cyclist safety with the new addition 2 years ago, I think what they should have done, they should have leafleted every household who's got a driving licence. If it's that significant, I think they should have leafleted, because it was a little bit of a fanfare 2 years ago. It was on the news, it was in the papers, but if you never read the papers, if you didn't put the news on that evening when you got home from work, it would have passed you by. So if they're really serious about pedestrian safety, they should have sent a leaflet out to everyone with a driving licence. God forbid you've got to take your test again, though.
Well, except we can all probably think of 2 or 3 people that you know of that really shouldn't be on the roads. I mean, I do think there is a question about whether there are accidents waiting to happen. But Anna, as an advocate, presumably, of cycling, do you feel like sometimes cyclists and cars are pitted against each other, and actually there should be space for each?
Well, they should share the road.
Share the road. And because, my husband cycles to work every day. I've lost count of the number of times that he's had to whack on the windscreen of a car that's nearly run him over, or a car's wound down a window and shouted at him. There's so much hatred. And bear in mind, he drives a car as well, so it's not like he's anti-motorist. But, do we need to get on a bit better for safety's sake?
Yeah, and I think that this change in the highway code was the idea was to go towards that, so to change the culture and prioritise vulnerable road users. So that would definitely improve safety. But if we look to other countries, we look to the Netherlands all the time for, they're a great example of how to look after vulnerable road users. The difference there is that the culture is so centred around cyclists. Everybody rides a bike there. So all the drivers also ride a bike. And that would really help, or it does really help in the Netherlands, and it would really help here to understand each other. Because you're right, there is a war on the roads, and it's not helped by, even this conversation, it's kind of like, we're sort of pitting each other against each other. And there needs to be much more of common understanding. Now, what I would love to see, and what I did a little bit when I was working as a cycling instructor, is take drivers out on bikes. And if that was part of the driving test, for example, to spend a small amount of time as a vulnerable road user, as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as part of that test, that would really open
would you be up
the
for
eyes
that,
of all
Danny?
of us.
See, I'm smiling because I have a feeling no.
Well, look, I don't think. I'm sorry just to use semantics with my opponent, but I don't think inflammatory words like war actually help. I don't see a war on the road.
With you. I agree with you. It's not me who says that, but those are the headlines that are put in newspapers. War on motorists, war on pedestrians. I haven't said that myself. I'm just repeating
Would you get on a bike,
media.
Danny?
I would get on a tandem with my opponent and cycle around either city centre Birmingham or when I come down to GB News on a Sunday, and we can film it and we can just see how lethal it is.
There we go.
I don't mind doing it. I could lose a few pounds as well. That's one of the great benefits of cycling.
One of the great benefits. Guys, thank you both very, very much indeed. I think it'll get a lot of people thinking about what they know or what they don't know about the highway code. So Danny Kelly and Anna Hughes, thank you.
Actually, somebody who just passed their test yesterday was Ruby Coit, Paul Coit's daughter.
Yes, she did.
Well done, Ruby.
Yeah, well done,
Ruby.
Ruby. First time?
Second time.
Second time. All best drivers pass second.
Did you do cyclist proficiency when you were at school, when you were primary school?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
You got a badge for that, a triangular badge.
That's right, on the back. Do you remember? Because there's only one thing I remember, and how you have to alert motorists that you're slowing down.
Oh.
How do you do that?
It was like that.
Yes,
1, 2, 3. And I don't think anybody would ever do that, because I'd usually come off my chopper as I'm trying to do that. But 1, 2, 3. Do you do the 1, 2, 3?
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I spend a lot of time on a bike.
Yeah, there you go. I think they probably threw that one out in 1979, to be honest with you. But maybe we could have one of those tandems like they had in the Goodies. Do you remember where they had 3 seats? Do you remember?
Did, yeah.
We had one of those.
Did you help Ruby, though, with her revision for the highway code? And did you learn anything? Because we've all forgotten it, haven't we?
I'm looking at stuff, I'll be honest with you, because I just remember the book. But now everything's online, and of course you do the test online now and everything. Oh, it's completely different. It really is. Apart from,
would you pass a test on sport?
Probably not.
Okay.
Would Marcus Rashford pass a test on how to behave himself in the future? Do you think? I don't think he'd pass that. Probably still not now.
I just worry why he's lost his way on the pitch.
Yeah.
Off the pitch, why this disobedience? United have hit him with a 2-week fine, which is substantial.
£650,000. That's not bad. So that's probably the most expensive night out. Probably even Elvis never had a night out like that. Yeah. But it's a lot of money. So this 12-hour bender in Belfast that he actually went out on, and see, you make a point, and does one go with the other one? Is it because he's failing on the pitch because of his nights out, or is it because he's not doing very well on the pitch that he's actually going out?
Or is it neither? Is it just that some footballers can't cope with the kind of lifestyle that it brings, and it eventually gets to everybody?
There's lifestyle and huge pressure as well.
Pressure, too much money, too much adulation for anyone to bear.
Could you've dated a footballer?
Not in a million years.
No.
I
about a rugby
be
player?
with somebody that everybody wanted to steal constantly.
Well,
I think it's horrible.
that's you and me finished then. That's no point with that. No point even going there. Yeah.
I tell you, we talk about money, though. I want to talk about Tyrrell Hatton. Tyrrell Hatton, who is he's the biggest British golfer to actually move over to Live Golf. He's getting a cheque for £50 million.
Why is this so much? I'm in the wrong business.
You are. You want to start playing sport. It's never too late. But £50 million. So the thing is, he's very cute about this, because Tyrrell Hatton is thinking now. It looks like there's going to be some sort of merger between Live Golf and the DP World Tour, which is the European Tour. And if there is, he gets to keep the money, and then he can play in all the majors and all the other competitions. So it's take the money while you can.
So he's going there before the premium goes and all of that. Going local down in Acapulco.
Yes.
We're talking about cliff diving World Series.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Acapulco because it was fun in Acapulco, whereas Elvis is the second mention of Elvis in the sport, where he would do the cliff diving. Yeah. And cliff diving is huge sport. And I thought I'd show you something, although it's not actually off a cliff.
Oh.
They call it cliff diving, but it's around 100 feet up. This is in New Zealand. Have a look at this. So this is in Auckland. It's the Cliff Diving World Series, and hopefully we will see some of that now. There we go. Look at the height. Look at that. This is Rhiannon Iflin from Australia. Look at that. Look at the scores there. They sit on the back of the boat. And Konstantin Popovici from Romania. Look at this, is 92 feet. I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
The impact on the water if you hit that wrongly.
I know, and I have no idea. It's one thing when you see it in the Olympics and on the high board, but from being that height, how they work out where they are and without a splash.
No.
Absolutely
And
incredible.
then the cliff diving to avoid the cliff face is, I always think, is a big thing as well.
Elvis managed it, though, didn't he?
But Elvis got into the water and you had an interesting observation to make. When Elvis got in the water and then he got out.
Yeah.
What?
His hair was completely dry and he still looked
Yeah.
Exactly the same. It's unbelievable. You got time for 2 birthdays? We got time for birthdays?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Henceforth.
Your favourite game, Isabel? Birthdays. 2 very famous footballers. Let's see them and whose birthday is today. There we are.
So
who are they, please?
Krejci and the other one, I've no idea who the other one is.
Dimitar Berbatov.
Oh.
That's not Berbatov.
It is Berbatov now. There he is on the left. Dimitar Berbatov. Peter Crouch. Who would you say is the older out of the two?
Berbatov.
Berbatov, yeah.
Yeah, and how old do you think they both are?
I would say... I'd say Krejci is probably about 40.
Yeah, 41 I'm going, Krejci.
Right.
49 Berbatov.
I think he's maybe about 47. Yeah.
I'll let you go again. They're both born on the same day.
No.
They are both born on the same day, and you're both wrong. So I'll give you another go. How old are they both today?
OK, maybe Crouchy's younger then. I'll go 39 for Crouchy.
42 each.
43 each.
OK.
Oh, sorry.
43 each.
Same day as in the same year as well.
Born, this day, 1981.
Just do not recognise Berbatov. What scarf that he's wearing? It's a Spurs scarf.
You know what? I'm a bit worried. I think it could be a Fulham scarf, because he did play at Fulham as well.
Well,
it could play as well as Manchester United and Spurs.
He didn't play at Fulham. He didn't play at Fulham.
He played at Fulham a bit. Yeah. He came over and played at Fulham. This after Manchester United, then he went abroad, came back again. Played at Fulham for a little while.
Really skillful player.
Wonderful player. Yeah.
Really good.
Strange, quiet man, though.
Is he?
Yeah.
Satisfying name to say as well, Dimitar
Berbatov. Yes. You say it better. I like the way you say it.
OK, thank you very much indeed, my friend.
Excellent. See you tomorrow.
Good game.
Good game. Look what you could have won.
Well, I'll tell you what, a good game coming up in the papers. This story's unbelievable. The tech billionaire Elon Musk, guess what he's done now? He's put some sort of receiver brain chip inside a human being successfully, which means they can control their laptop just by thinking. Think on that, and we'll be back in a minute.
Useful.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
We've got Nicky Hodgson and we've got Alex Armstrong, and they've got the papers before them today. Alex, where do you want to begin? What tickles your fancy?
Oh, so we've been talking about this in the green room, which is the Neuralink, Elon Musk's Neuralink. So he has successfully yesterday announced that they've installed the first ever brain chip into a human being. Now, I know viewers are going to go, that sounds extremely dystopian and scary, but there are some positive things to this, right? So what this Neuralink is immediately focused on is helping people with severe disabilities, i.e. someone with motor neuron disease that can't move their arms and legs, a paraplegic, for example, and it allows them to connect from the chip in their head to scroll on their phone, to make actions on a computer faster than anyone else would. Elon's big statement of this is that imagine if Stephen Hawking could type faster than a typist. You know, imagine what things could have come out of him if he could have been able to do things quicker.
I have one of those sort of brains. That
No one wants to know what's going on in there. Can you imagine?
my brain is, first to say I'm typing, right? I am like a minute and a half ahead of myself in my brain, and I get very frustrated with myself if I write or type or anything, because I just am so far ahead of what I'm physically trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can touch type. So.
Yeah.
Well, you could be a great case for this then. You'd be able to write whole pieces in the newspaper.
Seriously, they must be paying this sucker an absolute fortune. Would you let anyone experiment with a neural link in your brain?
I think it sounns worse. I think it sounds worse than it is.
Really?
Yeah. This person, I think, is actually a paraplegic. So I think this person's already quite severely disabled. So this, I think, at this point, maybe the patient would have said, you know what, anything's better than not trying. But you know, I understand the counter argument could be quite scary. Who's hacking into your brain?
The thing I would say though, Isabel, someone's had very bad depression, and I had a psychotic episode many years ago. I was very, very poorly, and actually, if somebody had told me at the point of the terrible, terrible depression, you can have this and it's going to make you feel better, I would have had it.
Well, you know what?
I really would have done. So
you've read my mind, because
I've
got the neural.
I've got the Neuralink.
We've got telepathy.
That you know, that basically. I go to doctors and they say, well, there's nothing wrong, your back's OK, but I can't walk. And they go, well, we don't know why. He was OK when he left here. And there's that thing, Alex, that just like Nicky, I think if someone could fix that for me and I could think and say, I want to move my right leg, I want to move my left leg, whatever, I would do it.
But you know what I always think, and this maybe says lots about my personality, is I always think about the evil agents in all of this, and I imagine someone hijacking me and putting a chip in my brain and then making me hit the nuclear button or something.
Well, listen,
I'd love to hijack you. I'd love
GB
that.
News with the evil voice in your
It might have
head.
already happened, we just don't all know it. Maybe we've all got Neuralinks. I mean, there's a very strong counter-argument to say, you know, there's obviously safety and security concerns about this stuff. Obviously, at the moment, it's a very controlled experiment, so who knows what will happen. But obviously, the footage she showed last year of the monkey having this chip in, it was able to play Pong without having a controller.
I don't like this. This is not. No, it's not incredible. We're messing with the way things are meant to be. We need to stop sending people to space. We need to stop interfering with people's brains. We need to stop with AI. We need to get back in our gardens, digging our own vegetables, and I'd be much happier. I don't like it.
But the one thing I
after the war, might have no choice.
The one thing I would say, Isabel, is that we already accept technology in our bodies anyway. Think about stents, porcine stents. We have pig parts in our bodies when we do heart surgery. Lots of people have got kind of like metal in their bodies that allows them to move, legs and joints and things, hip replacements. So we are already nearly there. We just don't like dealing with the brain.
Yeah, but it does go wrong, and this links back to another story in the papers today about how you can catch Alzheimer's. I don't know if you've got that in front of you, because it was in the last list and we didn't get round to it, but this was about what was they sharing? Some kind of medical...
Yeah, OK, so I think it's important to tell the viewers it's not about being near to anybody who's got Alzheimer's. You can't catch it like that. But what it's to do with is the spread of Alzheimer's in... it's a very specific example. So there were some patients that were being treated for a growth disorder. They were too short. And they were given a growth hormone. And in that, by transferring this growth hormone from some dead bodies who had, they donated their tissues after death, they also brought in Alzheimer's proteins. So that's what it's to do with. And this is really important because when we think about gene editing and when we think about fertility treatments that we are now on offer, where you'd be able to potentially maybe gene edit a baby so that they're not prone to a certain disease, this is the kind of stuff that we have to take into consideration. And again, something Alex and I always talk about, this is where AI actually comes in handy, because this is where you can do a model for this kind of thing and you don't have to test on anybody first to see what might go wrong.
Incredible breakthroughs in AI in this area, by the way, and I think this is where technology can be used for really great things. Of course, there's always a risk on the unknown stuff, the bad actors, which I know, Isabel,
It's not just me. Even Elon Musk himself was talking about how AI poses
and he should do that
to mankind.
It does indeed. It does.
But this is in medicine where we can model things first before testing on actual humans. That's where it can do a lot of good.
Oh gosh, I can't cope.
Alex, on this question of technology, Apple has accused the Home Office of an unprecedented overreach in an escalating row over spying.
Yes, so this goes back to I don't even remember the story last year, this encrypted messages argument that Apple have raised with the government here in the UK, saying that, the government basically don't want you to encrypt your messages, which keeps them private when you're basically texting over the internet. It keeps those messages completely scrambled so no one can get into them. The government want to access a backdoor to that information. They're claiming it's to do with keeping you safe. But now they've gone a step further, the UK, the Home Office have gone a step further, saying they want to have a first say on any new security built into any software of any company in the world, which gives the Home Office quite a massive overreach. Now, in response to this, tech companies are going to start pulling these features from the UK. They're not going to bow down to a small country like us, or are they? They're not going to have a multi-trillion-dollar business like Apple going, OK, we'll just do everything the UK government tell us to do. So the reality is here that I think the government are going to have to back down.
But why have the Home Office? There has to be...
Well, terrorism is the big one, saying they would like to know what potential terrorist conversations are happening in the UK.
COVID inquiry.
That's what it comes from. That's what it started from.
Isn't that a horrendous choice there?
Yes.
Where you go, OK, well, we'll let a few terrorists slip through the net and perhaps a few corrupt or criminal politicians because we don't want to lose the business of a massive multinational corporation.
But it's more than that, isn't it? It's about sacrificing liberty, because it's really a question about privacy, isn't it? About are there any private spaces left in the world because of tech? Tech can protect those, or tech can, release them. And then it is up to governments to legislate. And the other thing I would say is that, I don't agree with what the government is doing because they are getting invested in the wrong place. What they should be doing is looking at what tech is on the horizon and legislating to protect us from it now. Instead, what they're trying to do, the genie's out of the bottle, and now they're trying to impose a law after, and they're too slow, and people won't buy it. It won't work.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, the rise of AI and other tech is so rapid, it's almost impossible.
But we knew it was coming. That's the difference. We knew it was coming, and the House of Lords should have been debating this stuff 20 years ago.
Yeah, true.
Well, I think people like Apple have got away with murder and to what their devices can do. I mean, for instance, what is this one that I keep tapping? Oh, is it TikTok? I've got
You're not on TikTok, are you?
That's not Apple, though. That's the Chinese.
Yes, I know, but I know that. Right. So I've got people who send me messages on TikTok, right? So you go to open them, right, that's it, right? And the message begins for 3 seconds, this video, whatever it is. Then up comes this message, when is your birthday? My point is, what's it got to do with you when my birthday is? And it won't let you watch whatever you're supposed to watch unless you fill in your birthday on that, which I don't do.
Which is meant to be a child protection thing, but then, of course, it has that effect.
Why?
Because it's to do with putting an age limit in.
So the messages I may be looking at may need age...
It's obviously what people are sending you, Eamonn.
Well, they're from my brothers, so it wouldn't surprise me.
There you go.
Moving swiftly on.
Yeah.
What
They require too much information.
That's
too much
true.
information.
That is
true. Yeah.
Oh, I can't decide where to go. There's so many...
So many rubbish stories.
Hey, we take these, Eamonn.
No, I mean, no, just depressing stories.
Well, no, actually, this mental health story isn't as depressing as it looks, if you want to talk about it. So, according to the Times, 1 in 9 children are disabled in this country, and this is to do with the rise in mental health problems. But this story is wrong all over the place, and that's why I think it's important to discuss it. The first thing it says is it describes ADHD as a mental health condition. It isn't a mental health condition, it's a neurodivergence. That means it affects how somebody thinks. It doesn't make them an invalid, it doesn't make them poorly, and it doesn't make them disabled. You know, ADHD is a problem when it isn't treated and when, you know, somebody isn't cared for properly with it. So, for a start, that's rubbish. And then it goes on to say that, you know, there's been a rise in mental health conditions since COVID and that we've had a rise in children and families of children claiming disability benefits for children.
Yeah.
So this is the key to the story, which is kind of buried at the end, right? So what it's saying is that the cost of child disability payments have risen by 2/3 in a decade.
Right, and that is the crux of the matter there. Nikki, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Smiling Alex, thank you very much for lighting up our desk today. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Here's the weather. Alex Burker with all the details.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Very good morning to you. Alex Burkhill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst tomorrow is looking very windy for some of us, today it's actually going to turn largely fine and sunny. Yes, it's a bit of a cloudy start, particularly across central eastern parts of England, with some damp, drizzly weather for a time, but the thickest cloud and the outbreaks of drizzly rain clearing away towards the southeast as we go into the afternoon, with increasing amounts of sunshine following in behind and just a scattering of showers across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be around or a little bit below average for the time of year. Many places staying in single figures, but could get to highs of around 10 or 11 Celsius towards the south. Through this evening and overnight, we are going to stick with the largely clear skies across many parts, but turning increasingly cloudy across much of Scotland, and here the winds are really going to strengthen. That's due to a deep area of low pressure just to the north of the UK. That's going to bring some very strong winds as we go through tomorrow. Where we have clear skies across England and Wales, we could see temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing, so a touch of frost and some patches of fog to watch out for first thing tomorrow morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow and across much of England and Wales, it's actually going to be a largely dry day, but turning increasingly cloudy here. Meanwhile, for Scotland, a very wet picture as a squally front pushes its way southwards, could bring some heavy rain and some snow over the highest ground. That rain then pushing into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland later. Blustery showers following in behind with the risk of some hail, some lightning, and watch out for some very strong winds.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's coming up to 9 o'clock on Tuesday, the 30th of January.
Thank you for your company. You're tuned in to breakfast here in GB News. Eamonn Holmes and Isabel Webster.
Big news from Belfast overnight as the DUP agrees to a deal to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland and to get Stormont back to work.
A clear message from the DUP to London and Brussels. We've jumped, now you jump too. If legislation is promised that goes through the House, Northern Ireland will have a government in days.
The world on the brink. Despite new sanctions against Iran, Rishi Sunak and the United States continue to call for peace in the Middle East.
We are not looking for a war with Iran. We are not looking to escalate the tensions any more than they already have been escalating. In fact, everything we've done has been designed to try to de-escalate those tensions.
The Prime Minister talks tough on rail strikes as he blasts union bosses over what he calls a campaign of contempt for passengers. But Labour have hit back.
What he did was create a very deep-seated set of problems and acrimony between the unions and government. Until they actually get around the table and solve this, then we're going to end up in the situation we're in now. You can't legislate your way out of these problems. You can only negotiate.
We'll be speaking to the union boss, Mick Whelan, the real union boss from ASLEF, in just a moment.
Royals return home. The King and the Princess of Wales are on the road to recovery today as they both recuperate away from the limelight.
Yeah, it's a very positive news for the King and the Princess of Wales, but there are still 3 senior members of the royal family out of action this morning. More details shortly.
Hi, good morning. It's going to turn increasingly sunny for most of us as we go through today, but then some very strong winds are on the cards tomorrow. I'll have the details shortly.
Well, our top story this morning is that the DUP has announced they will end their boycott and return to power sharing with Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland after more than 700 days.
Despite protests during the 5-hour crunch meeting, the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, says he's taken a leap of faith and managed to secure the backing of his party.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
So how did all of this come about? What has changed? Let's go to our man Dougie Beattie, and hopefully he can tell us. It was a long meeting. It was a delayed meeting. They had bugs, and I don't mean insects, there as well last night, my friend. It had everything.
Well, it did. It would only be a drama, and only in Northern Ireland that such things could happen. But yes, this is a great news for Northern Ireland in some ways. Not all of the unionist communities are happy with Sir Geoffrey going back into government. Many saying that his 7 tests haven't been met. But really, Northern Ireland does need a government back. 2 years, near enough to the day on Saturday, it has been without government, and there has been substantial problems in that 2 years. Public sector strikes over pay parity, the infrastructure, very much roads and so forth, suffering a lot because, of course, there's no ministers in here behind us to look after such things. And really, 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, the institutions of state, the civil servants, as the Northern Ireland office that you and I remember was massive then, and of course over 25 years it's slimmed right down because the institutions behind us were up and running. They've never been perfect, but Northern Ireland does need a government. Now, Sir Geoffrey says that he has enough in this deal to meet his tests. And most of those, to be honest about it, will come in and around trade. I've been following this for many years, and because I come from an agricultural background, I understand trade, I understand how it works, and most trade deals start off with energy, food, taxation and then people, and it has really been the movement of food and the taxation and goods coming in and out of Northern Ireland because they have been held inside EU legislation and regulation that is different from the rest of the UK. Now, what we do know that he has secured here is a lane. Instead of the green and red lanes, there is another lane. So we really only now have red lanes, and goods that are coming into the UK, especially that of raw materials from a third country that's travelled into Britain, which is now seen as the EU as a third country. Apparently there is derogations in place for that to happen. Now, that may cause other problems inside the EU with other countries saying we want the same style of deal that Northern Ireland has got. But as yet, we don't know the minutiae of this deal and just exactly what Geoffrey has came up with, but we do know the bigger picture, and so that will help manufacturing in Northern Ireland. It will most definitely help the agri-food sector because they do now are guaranteed that they will have access to the UK market unfettered because 70% of Northern Ireland's trade goes into the UK. It doesn't go into the EU, and of course it feeds over 6 million mouths in Britain.
Well, we get all that.
He has
we get all that, Dougie, but is that more important than running that country? Is, you know, day-to-day business in Northern Ireland is ground to a halt. And I don't know about you, but most people I speak to say about politicians, their faith in politicians is at an all-time low, and they say, you know what, I wouldn't vote for any of them. I mean, Donaldson, by walking out with all of this, what is the penalty? What is the legacy from this walkout? Because things are far from fixed, and we've got to get, as you say, behind you there, these guys have got to get in there, sit there by the weekend and get that place back on its feet again.
Well, they do, and really the first thing that'll be on their desk is striking civil servants that are looking their wages brought into pay parity with the rest of the United Kingdom. And really how Northern Ireland is funded and ran. And that would include such things as the Rotherham formula, which means that they can get money out of central government, but once they've took that money, there's no going back with a begging bowl saying, I'm sorry, we've ran out of money. So that means that they have to put a 3-year budget in place, a programme for government in place. All those things have to be negotiated across a very tricky executive that has to represent both sides of the community. So the days of one for you and one for me are really gone, and these ministers will have to take electoral responsibility for what they're giving out and how they're running the country. No more free cake tomorrow all the time. And really you can look at the British government saying, well, we can see why they're doing this. And it means that these politicians behind us will have to look at bread and butter issues as opposed to political ones.
Hey, my friend, a lot to talk about, but basically good news. This is something we've been waiting for, as we say, for 2 years, and we hope it works and everybody is happy. Fingers crossed. Thanks very much, Dougie Beattie, there live from Belfast.
Thanks, Dougie. Now, coming up at 9:30, Britain's newsroom. Andrew and Bev join us in the studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. We've got a really great show today. We've got a complete, diverse range of topics. Obviously, we talked yesterday about Rishi Sunak going 36 hours without eating, and we're talking to a bit of an expert on that as to why that might be good for you.
A Hindu, to tell us, because it's a key part of his Hindu faith. Really interesting.
And also, this idea that when you cause a car accident, a traffic accident, should you go to prison or not? We're going to be talking to Sarah Hope. Sarah Hope is the wife of our political editor, Christopher Hope. And they had their family suffered a terrible accident several years ago in which she lost her mother, Sarah was injured, and their daughter lost a limb. And so Sarah's campaigning now to get stiffer sentences for people who commit road accidents. And there was a case this week, wasn't there, of a driver who was texting, WhatsApp, making calls, and caused an accident which killed a truck driver. And so Sarah's going to be talking about that, because that driver did not go to prison.
And also talking about the train strikes. What on earth has gone on with the government and its legislation about minimum services? Not a single rail company have bothered to use it.
What does that tell you? That this is just all talk?
Absolutely. One company tried, LNER, and they backed down when ASLEF said, OK, we're going from a one-day strike to 5-day strike, so they backed off at the first smell of trouble. Hopeless. This was flagship government legislation.
But who's to blame then for that?
Well, I mean, it clearly doesn't work because the unions have just said, go to hell. And where is the Transport Secretary, by the way? Doesn't you know his name? Where is he? Mark Harper. It's shameful.
And there's no... Where are the penalties for those train companies? There's no form of recourse. They've just said, we're just going to ignore it.
And the people who run these hopeless train companies, their bonuses are eye-watering, up 50% on average last year. Shameful.
£1 million one of them. Joke.
And our trains are a joke, and they're very expensive. On the rare occasions they
run.
run.
About transport, and the roads are no better, of course.
Not today.
One thing I would love to see, I just don't understand why this doesn't happen. Right, so somebody blows a tyre on the motorway, or whatever it is, and they end up in the outside lane. Why can't you, within 20 minutes or half an hour, get a lorry that comes up, lifts it up with the crane, puts it on the back of the lorry and brings it off to the side? Why are the roads, the aisles and the roads closed for hours?
It's hopeless, isn't it? I know.
It is ridiculous. I don't know whether there isn't just something expedient there with them and say, get this off, we bring a bulldozer in or whatever it is, push it off the side, photograph it all you want. What more can you tell?
There's no will, is there, Eamonn? There doesn't feel like there's ever a will to get things sorted.
It's that sense that nothing seems to work in this country anymore, I'm afraid.
Well, I think it's the Gatwick rail service today as part of the striking. People arrive in the UK,
I know, what
land
a terrible
here. Oh, sorry, you
advertisement
can't
for
get
Britain.
into London. It's
awful. They're going to have to get a taxi or...
guys, thanks very much. We are waiting for Mick Whelan, the union leader of the General Secretary of ASLEF.
He's at Waterloo, allegedly, so we'll see what's going on there. And we look forward to the programme, 9:30. Thank you both.
Meanwhile, we've got 18,000 quid to give away. It is the Great British Giveaway, and it only happens here on GB News. Have a go.
We want to turn 2024 into 2020 more with your chance to win £18,000 in cash to spend however you like. You really could be the next big winner of our Great British Giveaway. Phil from West Yorkshire won our last one. Listen to his reaction when we gave him the news.
I never won a penny in my life.
Well, congratulations, you've won £10,000.
Oh my God, wow.
For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Good luck. Stay with us. Still to come. The King and the Princess of Wales have returned. Cameron Walker is in Windsor for the very latest on their recuperation.
Also, we've got live on the programme the General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan. If you're affected by the train strikes, he's the man, hopefully, with the answers here on GB News Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
All happening today. Let's go live via satellite to Windsor Castle. There inside should be the King. He better be there because Cameron Walker is outside to tell us more. So discharged from hospital yesterday. He looked fit, he looked well, he looked refreshed, Cameron.
Yeah, he certainly did, Eamonn. He was all smiles to the waiting crowds who were really elated to see the King and the Queen, and he looked like he wasn't in any pain or anything like that. He walked very much to the car, as perhaps you would expect. It was a very public exit, in contrast to the Princess of Wales, who left privately, we believe, with the Prince of Wales at around 11 o'clock yesterday from a London clinic. Of course, she's been recovering from abdominal surgery, and she is expected to be out of action for around 3 months, which suggests to me that it's perhaps a bit more serious than what the King was in for, the treatment on the enlarged prostate. It's also understood, it's thought, that the royal children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, did not visit the Princess of Wales in hospital. which suggests that the first time they actually saw their mother in almost 2 weeks was when they came home from school here to Windsor. Adelaide Cottage is where the Prince and Princess of Wales live with those 3 children, and which is thought to be the longest period of time that the Princess of Wales has spent away from her 3 children. So no doubt she's very perhaps happy to be back home. Prince William has very much been a stay-at-home full-time dad. He hasn't been carrying out any engagements either, although it is thought he's had help from the children's nanny, as well as the in-laws Mike and Carol Middleton as well, and Princess Catherine's brother and sister too. But as for the King, as you said, he's expected to convalesce for around a month. He is, though, carrying out royal duties behind the scenes, so he's still going through those red boxes, signing off government papers and reading cabinet minutes too. Queen Camilla, she is keeping calm and carrying on. She's expected to be in Windsor Castle behind me later to celebrate the centenary of Queen Mary's Doll's House, which is one of the tourist attractions here at Windsor Castle. But as for the King, Prince William and Princess Catherine all still out of action for the time being, although the Prince William even's expected to carry out royal duties when the princess is settled after a few days or so. But it only means that one senior member of the royal family is continuing with royal duties at the moment, which highlights the fragility of this slimmed down monarchy which we've had over the last few years.
And Cameron, I share your worries about Catherine. I think, you know, given that after the birth of all 3 of her children, it was just a matter of hours before she came out and publicly waved to the cameras, I think we can infer from that this has been quite a knock for her, and obviously entitled to her privacy there. But what do you make of some of the suggestions that the King did perhaps a bit more of a wave and a walkabout than he might otherwise have done if Catherine hadn't have been discharged on the same morning, but you know, out the back, and the cameras hadn't managed to get a picture? He almost wanted to give a bit of what the people wanted there. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. Nothing happens by accident with the royal family, and I think both with Queen Camilla's public visits to the King and, of course, that very public exit yesterday does suggest to me that the King really wanted the British public and indeed the media to know that he was back fighting fit and very much happy to wave to the crowds. And as you say, it does take the spotlight off the Princess of Wales, Isabel, who clearly over the last couple of weeks has really wanted her private medical information to remain just that, private. And we're not going to speculate here onto exactly what was wrong with the princess. Well, we know that it was abdominal surgery. We know it's non-cancerous. So we just have to leave her to convalesce, really.
We've got to do it. And unfortunately, we've got to leave you, Cameron, because Mick Whelan, General Secretary of ASLEF, is available to speak to now. Mick, good morning to you. Today we're featuring walkouts from Southeastern, GTR Southern, Gatwick Express, GTR Great Northern, Thameslink, SWR Island Line and Southwestern Railway, all out. Mick, I've just got to ask you, why? Why are you all out? Why? It just has amazed me that this hasn't been settled, and I would have thought by now it's in the government's interest to settle this, to make more money available. They'll say it's the train operators and yourselves, it's a matter between you two, but it's not, is it? It's more than that.
Well, Eamonn, it's been 5 years since some of my members have had a pay rise. We're not looking for a pay rise for the years, the pandemic years. 3 years ago, when inflation started going through the roof, like many other sectors, we asked for a pay rise. We then found out that the people, the privateers that we work for, had done a deal with the Westminster government not to give us a pay rise, and there's a move afoot to rip up our terms and conditions. We still went into negotiations of good faith, and they've behaved despicably.
The Prime Minister has said, Mick, that you and ASLEF are waging a campaign of contempt against passengers. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think, Eamonn, you know our record. You know that we fight for a greener, safer, cheaper railway, and that's my day job. There's so much contempt that we went to work during the pandemic and got key workers to work and moved food and medicine around the country. We did our duty as every other sector did. We didn't expect the same level of reprobation as care and NHS, whatever else, but we expect, like anybody else, that we've got the right to ask for a pay rise.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Transport have issued a response to this claim that you've been making about not having had a pay rise for 4 years. They say that train drivers were protected over the pandemic and one of the few industries that saw their jobs relatively unaffected. Taxpayers, the vast majority of whom don't actually use the railways, are still subsidising them to the tune of £54 million a week. And they say that train drivers are already on well above average salaries. The median salary for train and tram drivers is around £59,000 in 2021, compared with £42,000 in 2001. You've already seen a huge increase in what you're earning.
Everything we've got, we've paid for through productivity. And so how many decades or half decades should we go without a pay rise in future? What, we're not allowed to have a pay rise. And also, I do remember the pandemic and being in those rooms where people were begging us to keep the country going, while the people that we worked for were making hundreds of millions of pounds, because they wouldn't have run those trains because they're shareholder orientated. They had no loyalty to the country, no loyalty to the passenger, no loyalty to their employees. And you've seen it this week, where companies have been boasting about the free money they get off the government. We see every company that we work for, because we don't work for the government, by the way, people forget this, we work for those privateers, those first groups and others that have been in our industry for 23 years, who are declaring hundreds of millions of pounds in profits, paying dividends to their shareholders, yet see fit not to give us a pay rise.
Do you know, Mick, I look at these things, and so often we talk about pay. And people concentrate on pay, but conditions are important, staffing levels are important. We've already had a climb down on the amount of staff available on platforms and whatever, and I'm one of those people that at the moment I need staff. I can walk 20 steps, 30 steps or so, but I couldn't walk the length of the platform to get the express to Manchester. I would need to be pushed in a wheelchair. I would need somebody to help me onto the train with my case, whatever I'm carrying. Can you guarantee me, or under the present sort of conditions, can you guarantee me that there would be staff available to do that when you are working?
Well, I don't represent those grade groups, but I believe in a fully staffed railway. I'm proud to do so. I believe fully staffed trains, fully staffed platforms, fully staffed stations. Look, it's a public service, right? It's a service that generates the local economy, the national economy, and you don't have to run it at a profit. Well, you have to run it effectively as one of the 4 factors of production, which it is.
Yeah, as a public service that runs, we've seen rail bosses awarding themselves in some instances a 61% pay rise with £1 million bonuses, and yet the customers, the people who want to use the trains, are having to endure this relentless strike hell. And I think the Prime Minister might be right that there is this contempt towards the customer. Ian Duncan-Smith has said that rail bosses have rank cowardice for failing to use the new legislation to provide a minimum service. What do you make of that?
Well, I naturally don't think that forced labour in the 21st or 22nd century is the right way forward. I think it's an stain on our democracy. So very simply, if you can't solve a situation, you change the rules and force people to take away their human right to strike. I'm not quite on board with that, but at the same time, no one's been able to tell me how to do this safely. One operator told me it would take him 90% of staff to run a 40% service. And also the knock-on effect for the future days would be immense. But also, on a 3-shift system, you don't have 90% of staff available on any given day, so it doesn't work.
Mick, we would love to have more time to explain more about what is going on. We appreciate your time today, and we thank you very much indeed. Mick Whelan is the ASLEF General Secretary. We're back tomorrow from 6.
Bye-bye.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel.